Good morning. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is March 1st, and we are taking up our financial assurances rulemaking this morning in a duly noticed meeting. We will start with a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bogue, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Hackett, Commissioner McGowan. Here. Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Nanjaba.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Okay, great. And that is a quorum. And so we are live and available here this morning. We are taking up docket number 2106-00097, the financial assurances rulemaking. To sort of orient folks as to where we are, we received the final red line draft from staff. And we are now here today to continue with deliberations. To initiate, I would first call upon Director Murphy if she's ready to go.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity. Akin to what I prepared for the presentation of the 211 draft, I've kind of gone through and done a similar thing for the direction that staff received from Commission, and wanted to walk through a few slides, apparently 43, to just kind of go review the changes, flag a couple of places where I have questions, to orient everybody in the document. The blue font, if you recall, is the Commission direction from February 22nd. Black font is the Commission direction from February 23rd. Green font are what I'm presenting today in the changes. Some of the conforming and clarifying changes are not included in this presentation. If you read through it, you'll note that in a number of places we moved from prior to previous to use conforming language and kind of some other cleanup stuff. I'm not planning on reviewing that. I'm happy to answer questions about it. And as we go through this, it's actually an orange line, but the orange line or the red line shows the changes between the 211 draft and the 225 draft. Some of the text on these slides is small, but I know that everybody's had time to work through the rules. I just want to make sure it's on screen if we need to have a quick conversation about it. If I need to pull up slides or pull up actual rule language at any point in time, I'm ready to. I know AAG Stafford and AAG Davenport are also on call to move through this. It's a really nitty gritty explanation to also kind of zoom back out and say, I think that as we look at the changes that you all suggested and made late last week or early last week that were implemented in the 225 draft, we have a robust set of rules that really work together, that are fully keyed into the principles outlined in Rule 702 in terms of the options, financial assurance options, and how operators fit into them. And from that, so many of the other changes work to successfully implement Senate Bill 19-181's directives. So with that, I'm going to jump in to the actual slides themselves. This is a topical slide that we worked through last week. This was the ultimate direction on the definitions of inactive and low producing. And I'll warn you, my intent is to go fairly quickly this morning. I think the changes, everybody remembers the dialogue we had. I don't want to recreate it or bore anybody with restating it or perhaps misstating it. So jumping into the definition of inactive and low producing. The proposed definition for low producing is on your screen right now, focusing on 2 barrels oil equivalent or 10,000 cubic feet natural gas equivalent, with the direction about how to calculate whether a particular well should use the BOE or MCFE threshold. That language was largely carried over from the former definition of inactive in the 211 draft. Jumping now to the definition of inactive, you'll see on the screen that we've eliminated the production threshold. We've also included the language that staff inadvertently struck around defining shut-in wells as inactive wells. And we've also stricken the language related to how to calculate BOE or MCFE because, again, we've eliminated the production threshold in the definition of inactive. We did make one conforming change in 434C that ensures that our requirements for inactive wells successfully communicate with the regulatory provisions in 702 related to the Commission's direction that financial assurance plans should account for single well financial assurance for low producing wells in certain circumstances. And so we just want to make sure again that the definition of an active, the regulatory requirements in 434C all hang together with the commission's direction in Rule 702. I think that rounds out option 1. Option 2, or kind of discussion point 2, was the commission's robust discussion around financial assurance plan options and the criteria, amounts, and the information gathered. We made no changes to the thresholds for different plan optionalities, but we did want, the commission did direct changes to using single well financial assurance for low producing wells instead of inactive wells in options 1 and 2. Recognizing that single well financial assurance is necessary for low producing wells is necessarily included in options 3 and 4 because it is bonding up to single well financial assurance. And so with that, kind of jumping into the specific regulatory language for options 1 and 2 and the changes to incorporate financial assurance for low producing wells above or below a particular threshold. That language is on screen. It's fairly similar. The difference is, of course, the percentage of wells that can be covered by the operator's blanket bond. Option 1 is on the left, option 2 is on the right, with rule citations. And then we made conforming changes in the discussion of transferred wells. This slide, we talked about a couple of different things, but no rule changes were required. Now talking about moving into the financial assurance plans for options 3 and 4, there was specific commission direction to ensure that operators do not get credit for plugging out of service wells if the operator has added wells to the out of service list. And so that language, again, it's very, very similar between options 3 and 4. On your screen is 702 D3C little I, and 702 D4C little I. Again, the difference between the language on the left and the language on the right is the presumptive contribution, with option 3 being on your left with 5% and option 4 being on your right with a presumptive contribution of 10%. But again, the critical language that you all directed to include is shown in the orange line. Options 3 and 4. Moving into the discussion of option 5. I think I'll just jump in. So a couple of things. One is the language in the second bullet point with the first snip of language shows the changes to reflect the commission's direction on what is the threshold an option 5 operator must demonstrate to be able to apply for an option 5 plan. As I was discussing with stakeholders in the last couple of days, I think the stakeholders flagged that the language in 705D5B(2) needs to be corrected to reflect low producing. When I first read it over the weekend, I read it differently, but I agree with the stakeholder suggestions that we need to tie this back to the concept of low producing as it relates to the transfer rules in Rule 218, given the commission's discretion and oversight of transfers of of low producing wells in the context of an option 5 plan. So I think that we do need to tie those together a little bit more closely. I think staff inadvertently missed it. And then when I read it over the weekend, I thought it said something different. When I looked at it again last night, I agree with stakeholders' comments that we need to make that change. So that's one action item out of today that I would like you all to consider making. Turning now to option 6, we had a lot of discussions. We ultimately settled on this direction for staff, and how staff has implemented the different components on this slide are in 2 separate provisions of 702. 702C6, which sets out the criteria for what an operator needs to have to apply to be an option 6 operator. The commission settled on 2 different thresholds for that. Those are reflected in A and B. And then 702D6 sets out the financial assurance requirements for option 6. Again, we're going to exclude it out of service wells, financial assurance amount of $40 million, and then have specific considerations for low producing wells above 25%, inactive out of service wells, and then transferred low producing wells. So I think that rounds out option 6. And I know I'm going lightning fast. So I'm happy to talk about these slides later. I just am trying to put everything on the table and then make sure we have the opportunity to have a conversation. again, option 2, or sorry, continuing with discussion item 2, the information within financial assurance plans and the process for reviewing said plans. I think the commission direction was to include language very similar to what was in option 5, plan submittal requirements, and apply that to all of the other options. The language as I understood it from the commission was the first 2 sentences of 702 D1D, or sorry, 702 D5D. So what I have on screen is a snip from 702 D1D, which is an example or an exemplar for the same language that staff has inserted into 702 D2D, D3D, and D4D and D60. Just as an FYI, it's all the same. And so any change that you want to make to it will need to be carried forward into other provisions or not, depending on your direction. And then moving into the discussion of the director and commission review of financial assurance plans. I would note first in 702B, which is B1, which is the language on the left side of the screen, there's kind of some substantial revisions that reflect more than anything else, a slight reorganization of this section. Previously, we had broken out existing operators and new operators, and then subparts for how to review new and old plans. Staff felt it made more sense to have a section dedicated to initial financial assurance plan submittals and how those would be reviewed, whether you were an existing operator or a new operator, and then have a separate provision, which is 702B2, which is on the right side of your screen, that describes how revised financial assurance plans will be reviewed. So I wanted to articulate first the structural change, which may make some of the red line a little bit less dramatic or less scary. I think the most important substantive change that came out of the commission's direction last week is around option 3 and 4 and making it a director level decision. If the applicant, the operator, has requested no changes to the presumptive time to bond up, or the presumptive 5% contribution, annual contribution for option 3, or 10% contribution for option 4, and has not requested anything other than single wealth financial assurance for the totality of their assets. And so that language has been built into the first paragraph, the director's review of initial financial assurance plans. And then the catch-all, if you will, is at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side, in which for any plan submitted that doesn't qualify for direct review becomes a commission hearing. So that would encompass plans under 5, under 6, and that request modifications or deviations from the presumptive amounts or timelines set forth in options 3 or 4. That same change is carried forward into 702B2, which is on the right side of the screen. And so I think that I just wanted to articulate kind of that framework change and how it's been integrated. Moving on, in this discussion of topic 2 around financial assurance plan options and criteria and amounts, I think it was an important discussion around how staff would document its annual review. So staff has proposed including language consistent with your direction in 707A1 that documents how staff will do it. I think that the minutia of how this is going to get done in terms of staff having either a form or something appended to the financial assurance plan, depending on how kind of the IT components work out, does not need to be in the rules. We need to confirm that the doc will document the review in writing and make those results available to the public on the commission's website. Where staff currently envisions housing that information is in the operator's file. So I hope that makes sense, and then also preserves flexibility should we have a different database or a different system, so long as the director's review is in writing and those results are available and accessible to the public. So jumping now into topic 3, this is how we're calculating single wealth financial assurance. The direction is on this slide, how that has been integrated. So we've stricken the previous definition, which I haven't shown on this slide. I didn't think anybody needed to see a whole bunch of strike through in this construct or in this context, and then provided kind of the definition and then how to do the math within the definition itself of single well financial assurance. I hope it's relatively straightforward to understand. I think as part of the discussion around single well financial assurance, and in particular related to demonstrated costs submitted by an operator, there's a discussion about whether some of that information is confidential business information and should be declared as such under 223. So we've proposed a conforming change in 223, which is on the left side of your screen. And then, so I think that buttons up the single well financial assurance definition. One of the discussion points on the 23rd related to collecting data associated with operator actual costs for plugging and abandoning a well and then reclaiming the facility or location, and how to collect those costs to understand the suite of costs or expenses to better inform a single well financial assurance rulemaking. Through that discussion, I think there were kind of three different buckets of information that were considered to be helpful. One were the orphan well costs that COGCC incurs and will be expending pursuant to federal funding, or the orphan well or the annual well fee once we move past federal funding. The second bucket are actual costs incurred by operators through their own plugging, abandonment, and reclamation work. And the third bucket would be the demonstrated costs submitted by an operator to support their own calculation of single well financial assurance. As we consider those different components, where I think the commission direction landed last week was for staff to collect plugging and abandonment costs on a Form 6S, which is the form that staff receives once an operator has completed plugging and abandonment of a well. And then also for reclamation costs, collecting those costs on a Form 4 that was submitted to notify the commission that final reclamation was complete. As we worked through those issues, I had concerns about whether we had adequately noticed those rules, the rules related to the Form 6S and the Form 4 for reclamation, and became concerned about it. In talking through it, I think that there are alternative ways to make sure that we can gather this information, and I'm happy to explore that. But I did want to note that there are no changes included in staff's draft from Friday, the 25th, that incorporate this direction because of my concerns around scope of notice. Again, I have alternative suggestions if we want to walk through those about how to make sure that that information is collected consistent with commission direction. Now moving to topic 4, the financial assurance for transfers of wells. Rule 218B5 has been modified to reflect the intent that collecting single well financial assurance for low producing wells that are transferred remains important to the commission, and the recognition that how that can occur is through the financial assurance plan options of essentially the buying operator in consideration for what the post-transfer financial assurance plan would look like for that buying operator. Again, this goes back to my overarching comment that the way these rules function is to really focus first on an operator's financial assurance plan and then understand how many of the subparts integrate into it. And so that the language in 218B5, I think, reflects the intent that we want to look closely at transfers of low producing wells and understand how those low producing wells fit into the buyer's post-transaction portfolio. Turning now to Rule 218D and E, to ensure that that can be successfully integrated together, those components, right? Both the consideration of the transfer and consideration of the revised financial assurance plan. We have gone ahead and proposed that a revised financial assurance plan needs to be submitted. And also confirming that the buyer needs to submit financial assurance as contemplated by the plan. So again, that's 218D and E. Turning now to the orphan well fund and the fee calculation. We walked through a number of different options and ultimately settled on assigning a fee to an operator on a well-by-well basis, dependent on the operator's overall average production. So what we have done in Rule 205C3 is to articulate the fee based on the production threshold, and again, articulate how an operator calculates its production threshold for purposes of this rule. I think one important distinction in our mind from the Orphan Well Fund fee calculation and the operator's financial assurance plan is that we've written 205C3 to contemplate the prior year's reported production, whereas financial assurance plan are based on the prior 12 months. So it's more of a rolling average. I think for purposes of calculating the fee, we need to pick a date certain by which we're going to calculate what your production threshold is and also what wells you have that will be subject to it. And so that to me is how A, little 3 and B, integrate successfully to ensure that we can plan for what operators will be charged and what the fund will be receiving. But I did want to note that distinction. One of the important questions was, is this really going to generate $10 million? And so there are assumptions built into this summary slide on the screen, starting with Julie did the math, which should make everybody a little bit nervous. But I did ask staff to pull the underlying data for me, who are much better at this than I am. And to date, we do not have 2021 production finalized. It was due 2 weeks ago. Staff is in the process of QA/QCing that data. We will get it finalized in the coming months. But what we do have is operator production from 2020 and well counts from 2020, and then the estimated plugged and abandoned well counts from 2021. And so the estimated plug counts from 2021 included both Form 6S's that have been approved, so plugging has been completed, and 6S's that are under review by the commission. So I'm not sure external stakeholders would get to 1539 as a total number of plugged and abandoned wells in 2021, but we're trying to take a broad look at the plugging to make sure we are taking a fairly conservative estimate. I think this also will not account for wells that were drilled during 2021, so they would also be feeding into or generating additional funding. And so zooming back, if we pulled data on the operator's average daily production as above or below, the 15 BOE MCFE threshold, put the 2020 well count into those two buckets, right? Like either above or below the line, and then accounted for what plugging had taken place in 2021 to arrive at the estimated well count for 2021 and what fee would be associated with it. As you can see, it's a very close, very close to $10 million, which I think affords us some, flexibility, but I think it's the right place to start. I know Commissioner Mesner, this was important to you to, I think, see or better understand, and wanted to confirm that I did do it. It is still an estimate. There are still assumptions built into it. But I think that I feel pretty good going forward on this basis, recognizing that staff will be looking at it in a year, and the commission will be looking at it in a year following that too. And if, I'm wildly off base and I need to eat some crow, I'll be happy to come back to you in 6 months and tell you I screwed up, and we'll start all over. With that, turning now to the 6th topic. I know there are 12 topics, but the heaviest, meatiest of it we've been through, I promise. The 6th topic on out of service wells. This is another place where I am not sure I precisely integrated your direction. In 434, as I went back and looked at what I understood the direction to be, it was to incorporate language from the Allied Local Government Coalition on the components that except for prioritization. And so that's what staff has done in 434D3F and 434D5E. When I go back and look at the language direction on the slide, it's more focused on limited to delay of repair. And so there may be a gap between the language integrated and the actual commission direction. And I wanted to flag that for you as something to consider or to think about, and to double check that I've adequately carried forward your direction in this arena. A couple of other places where changes were directed on the out of service process, wanting to ensure that the director had the discretion to elevate or to better check in on if an operator is not making timely progress towards its goals. And so I think the context for this conversation again was somebody puts 1,000 wells on the list. They have 8 years to do it. What do they need to do in year 1 to make sure they're on the path to achieve plugging those wells by year 8? We added language to the director's discretionary review provisions in 434D8B to specifically contemplate this scenario. And then the second component was that the commission directed that operators should have until 2023 to take advantage of kind of those longer plugging timelines that were articulated in 434B4. That was a fairly simple change to December 31st, 2023. So that's the second half or the lower half of the slide with the direction in the language on screen. The surface owner protection bond, I think this was should be a quick one, but the idea was to include a statewide blanket bond at $100,000. The idea is that would cover an operator who's currently relying on a statewide blanket bond could bond up to $100,000 and continue relying on it and could rely on that moving forward. 702A1B, this is grandfathering language that I had initially included, not knowing quite where pieces were going to shake out. I had suggested deleting it. The commission ultimately directed deletion of it. I wanted to flag that if anybody was wondering why in 701 D2 there was language that has been stricken, it's because it really related to integrating the grandfathering provision. And since we don't have the grandfathering provision, we don't need that language either. On federal wells, there were no changes. Voluntary relinquishment, there was a direction to eliminate it. I've only shown the strike through language from the 205. Conforming changes, staff made conforming changes in the 500 series and 503, 504, and 505, I believe. On insurance, there were 2 different directions. One was to ensure that an operator could achieve compliance with 705B's policy or coverage amounts through multiple policies. That language is in the second sentence in 705B. And also to consider excluding disposal wells, not allowing an operator with production wells to have a seismic exclusion from their policy. This may not be the most artful language we've ever come up with, but I think we were trying to capture the intent. So I'm happy to have more dialogue there, of course. And then turning now to the last topic, topic 12, that has a number of subparts. I think there are 3 or 4 slides on this. The first direction was to make sure the consolidation language contemplated the idea, and I think, again, Commissioner Mesner, you raised this to make sure that if an operator is consolidating some of their subs, they need to be consolidating all of their subs and not picking and choosing. So we've reflected that in the 2 places where the discussion of consolidation takes place in 702C7 and 705. In 503G12, the commission directed a change from 36 months to the past 3 years. And so that change has been reflected. And then I think the final direction was in 706 to ensure that an operator can seek commission review if the director or commission fails to timely release financial assurance pursuant to 706A. And so we've built that into 706E. And I think with that, I have gone through hours of thoughtful work in less than 30 minutes. So if anybody's ears are burning, I apologize. One time was when I was a practicing lawyer, had a court reporter from the Deep South tell me, Miss Murphy, you have got to slow down. And I'm afraid she probably needed to tell me that again this morning. So forgive me, and especially you, Chair Robbins, as you understand the cadence of the speech in the Deep South that I've completely obliterated this morning.
We definitely don't talk that fast in the Deep South. Just saying. No, I appreciate the walkthrough of the work that was done by staff. Really want to applaud your staff, applaud the AAGs for the fine efforts over the course of this last year that have established a very workable framework for us to consider today. as we take up these matters in the final day, hopefully, of deliberations. So with that, we have before us the draft. I know there were multiple opportunities for stakeholders to have discussions with commissioners. I know I talked with a bunch of folks. I'm sure you did as well. Looking to see who might want to lead out with regard to where we're at, where we're going, and where we ought to be. Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just had a couple of questions, if I could, for Director Murphy, just to clarify a couple of pieces of the rule language that I wanted to make sure that I was understanding correctly. So let's see here. The one in particular is 434 C2C. This is not something that was a new red line in this draft, but I just wanted to better understand how this exception works. So this is wells that are inactive for good cause. You know, how those get counted in the option structure. You know, are they excluded in total from the counts, or are they considered in a different way? So if you could maybe just help me understand that piece. It's kind of relates to some other things later, so I just wanted to better understand.
Thank you, Commissioner Najapa. It would be my interpretation that the Form C is an exception, or sorry, the exception process under 434 C2 big C allows an operator to request an exception from the requirements that would relate to the financial, to the well related to 434 C1, which is the direction that within 6 months of a well becoming inactive, the operator needs to return the well to production, bond up, or add it to the out of service list. As I have interpreted it, I would infer, and sorry, I'm moving back and forth between the language, but I want to make sure it's on the screen for everybody to take a look at. I would infer that accepting the well from the inactive status would not eliminate it as a low producing well, because those are different distinctions in my mind. Those are different considerations. And so to me, even if a well was determined to not be inactive, if its production still fell below the low producing threshold, it would be accounted for in the operator's low producing well counts.
Okay, and so thank you, Director Murphy. And so it's more related to a shut-in well that you know, may be designated as inactive if there's a good cause for that well to be shut in or temporarily abandoned, that that designation would not apply. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And let's see. I think that actually answers the other question I had. So that I just wanted to get that clarification. Thank you.
Looking at others, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button there. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to start off just by saying another thanks, just from me as one commissioner to staff, to Director Murphy, to AAG Stafford, for all the work that's gone into this, right? I mean, this is a big deal that we're going through. There are a lot of changes, and we are trying to capture really a complete just change in the way we do things. Every lever that we pull kind of affects another one, right? It's almost a game of this ongoing whack-a-mole to make sure that we have all the interrelated parts connected appropriately. The language makes sense. And I think that the agency and the staff has done an absolute bang-up job in putting this together. So thank you for that. going through this weekend, I was thinking, I think we've landed in a really great spot. And I was feeling that way after our deliberations last week. So I had a lot of optimism coming into this draft and reading it over the weekend. Much of that was confirmed. And I don't think that we're in a position to really reintroduce a lot of things, or at least I'm not as one commissioner, a lot of things that are framework related. I think that we've got the framework dialed in. And I think that I have a couple tweaks to language, to making sure that we captured things the right way from our deliberations into this draft rule. And then I've got 2 kind of clarification points to really make sure that the changes that we adopted last week reflect the intent of what we were trying to do and kind of how it all works. So I've got 7, non-technical things and 2 technical things, although they're all kind of technical. So I'm just going to start walking through them, if that's all right, Chair. And I'm just going to, I'll introduce them and then I'll open them up. We can all chat about them and make sure that we're all on the same page. And then move on from there. And I've got a list. So if we get off and another commissioner wants to jump in with something related or something associated with that, I have no problem coming back to my list anytime during these deliberations. I certainly don't want to usurp, the leadoff position here. So I'll start with a couple. The first one is something that I brought up in deliberations in regard to option 5. So I'll let everyone kind of flip to that part of the rules. But really it's I got to find 2. Let's see. So for the option 5 criteria under rule 702, I think C5, option 5, it says that the really the threshold for getting into option 5 is that, and this is going to the last sentence there, that an operator can apply for it with criteria due to circumstances that prevent an operator from meeting the financial assurance amount specified in Rule 702 D1 through 4. And so I took exception to the word prevent, not only in the first draft, kind of when it came out, and I talked to Director Murphy about that a little bit offline and brought it up in our deliberations last week. When I'm a stickler for language, right? I'm a stickler for when we read things and what these words mean and really make sure that they're appropriate. So when I read prevent, when I first read this draft early on, I read that as what prevention means is it eliminates the possibility of, right? And I don't think that's what we are contemplating here. I think that what we're contemplating here, at least what I was contemplating, is if there are times when an operator's portfolio, an operator's situation does not merit, or it's inappropriate for them to be in an options 1 through 4 financial assurance plan, that we have this relief valve and this opportunity for them to explain their exceptional circumstances to us and apply for a bespoke, customized financial assurance plan in that regard. So my suggestion is if we look at the language here, is to replace the word prevent to the words make prohibitive for. So this implies a very high bar of difficulty, but not an impossibility. And I think that's an important distinction in the words we choose for which operators may be eligible to get into option 5.
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez, for bringing this up. I've been thinking about this one a lot too, and prevent still felt to me almost like undue hardship, and I'm not sure that I see option 5 that way. I see it more as you plug yourself into one of those options, and then you realize, and I guess I was looking at it a little bit differently, and we'll offer another alternative for language. I was looking at it going back to Senate Bill 181 language, that maybe one of those options after you go through it is unnecessary or unreasonable. And that then provides an avenue into the option 5, leaving in kind of also an exceptional circumstance along with it. But I am thinking along the same lines that you are in trying to figure out what we mean exactly, what how we want to use the option 5, or how an operator could choose the option 5 plan. The other piece for me under option 5, and I'm not sure how this relates to Director Murphy's earlier presentation, I was thinking that option 5 also needs to have some sort of contemplation of in excess low producing wells, but no specific number tied to it. I do want to see when they produce or offer up a plan for consideration by the commission that there is some sort of consideration and contemplation of the number of low producing wells that the operator has, because we're asking that of every other option. And I don't have a number that I want to tie to it, but I would like to see it contemplated in the plan. And I feel like maybe we just talked about that earlier in your presentation, Director Murphy, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding everything.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate both of your thoughts on this one. I had given some thought to this one as well. I mean, I think a couple of things. One is, in my interpretation of our deliberations, the consideration of financial hardship was one that was being considered for the utilization of option 5. I tend to agree with Commissioner Gonzalez that the prevent language may be a little challenging in there. I actually think that the prohibitive, I think that language makes sense that Commissioner Gonzalez included there. I will note that in the language, it's not an and, but an or as well, right? And so it could be or an exceptional circumstance. I think the term exceptional already covers the word unique. So I'm not sure the word unique needs to be included in there, but rather just, at least from this commissioner's standpoint, unique and exceptional. Exceptional covers unique. So I would tend to be supportive of Commissioner Gonzalez's language in that sense. I think that the unnecessary and unreasonable can also work. And so I'm happy to hear other commissioners' thoughts on that. But I do think that the gist of the conversation that we had last week around what are some circumstances that we would like to see operators could be able to utilize option 5, and it was undue hardship and exceptional circumstances were the two that I think were most highlighted in that scenario. Now, having said that, I do agree with Commissioner McGowan that the single well financial assurance for low producing wells needs to be assumed in an option 5. And I think we had a discussion last week, at least that was my recollection of our deliberations, that that consideration, like a starting place as an operator was entering into option 5, would be whatever standard option based on their production threshold they would be in. And to me, that also included contemplation of the single well financial assurance requirements for low producing wells based on whatever their production threshold option they would have naturally been in the standard option structure. So I would suggest language that said it is assumed that the operator will meet the single well financial assurance obligations of its low producing wells based on the production threshold and allowances in the standard option structure. That can go in the statement of basis and purpose. I think it can also go in the rules. But I think that was the deliberation that we had that kind of created an assumed place. Now, understanding in option 5, they're gonna ask for a different financial assurance plan structure, right? And so that's contemplated there. But I think that an operator needs to understand that the assumed place is here, and it can be built out from there. And so I think that's where I'm landing on those two.
Commissioner McGowan?
I think I saw Commissioner Nanjapa raise her hand. She hasn't talked about this yet, so I'll wait and see if she asks what I was thinking.
Go ahead, Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner McGowan. I was just going to comment on this. So if you had a question, I will defer to you.
Thank you. Commissioner Messner, sir, are we saying with what you've just talked about, that the starting point for, if you're going to take option 5 is the threshold for a low producing well, but it could be amended based on whatever we say, prohibitive reasons or unnecessary or unreasonable reasons that could be changed. So if your normal production level put you into option 2, you had more than 5% inactive and you looked at your single well financial assurance, now all of a sudden your bond level is, I'm making up a number, $98 million, that feels prohibited, or that's prohibitive or unnecessary or unreasonable for that operator. They go through option 5, they explain what it would have been, and they offer an alternative. I'm just trying to understand what it means to start at your presumptive amount under the options and how you ask for something different.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in my contemplation, it just gives the operator a starting point. I mean, to me, it should be, it should be challenging for an option 4 operator to come in through option 5 and say, I would like the option 1 blanket bonding amounts, right? Because that's not how this whole financial assurance concept is designed, right? And so based on a production threshold and based on the philosophy of how we utilize this option structure, we're addressing where an operator is in the lifetime of their operations. We're contemplating addressing single well financial assurance for low producing wells. And so as they come in to present an option 5 plan, that's the assumed, in my opinion, that's kind of the assumed starting place. So they're saying, hey, this is where I'm at in the standard 4 options. This is why my circumstance is exceptional, or this is why it's prohibitive for me to be able to do this, and this is my solution. But they still have to address single well financial assurances for low producing wells. They still have to address the blanket bonding that is required, and it's up to the operator to determine how they're going to propose addressing that. But it's not ignoring or discounting the fact that there is those general obligations that are set forth in the standard options that need to be a starting place as an operator looks at how they would like to propose a unique individualized or an exceptional individualized financial assurance plan.
Commissioner Najapa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Messner, for that clarification. I guess just following up on that, would that not be just limited to options 1 and 2 because options 3 and 4 are already all presumed single well financial assurance?
Thank you for the question. No, I don't think so. I mean, yes, you're right. They are presumed single well financial assurance for all of them. I mean, I don't think that option 5 precludes a option 3 operator from coming to the commission and saying through an option 5, based on my portfolio and based on, my operational structure, I would like to propose or consider, some of my wells to be covered by a blanket bonding option within option 2 or a modified blanket bonding structure. And then some of them would be considered single well financial assurance for a shorter amount of time. Or, that's that exceptional circumstance. That's that creativity. That's what I think we have deliberated on trying to allow, right? And so I agree that if you're coming in as an option 3 operator, it is, at least my mind, assumed that all of your low producing wells, not only low producing wells, but all of your wells are single well financial assurance based on the assumed landing place, based on your production thresholds of where you would start, right? And so I agree with that, but I think that's just across the board on how I would contemplate that. So at option 1, you've got a 10% low producing well allowance. At option 2, you've got a 5% low producing well allowance. In option 3 and option 4, you're contemplating single well financial assurance for all the wells over a designated timeline. So those are all the assumed places to start, right?
Thank you for that clarification. No, I think that helps, and I don't disagree. I think I was also kind of thinking about this and came up with other language that I don't like as much as what is up here on the screen. So I will. I think I like the make prohibitive for. I think that's feels a little more clear for me. I also agree that the unique may be redundant. But I did definitely, one of the things that I wanted to bring forward on this was the issue of how low producing wells are addressed in option 5. So I appreciate the discussion and I am in agreement.
Thank you, Commissioner Nanjapa. Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and I appreciate the discussion there. And I think that Commissioner Nanjapa's question about the presumption for single well financial assurance makes it challenging for me with regard to options 3 and 4 to think about including this in rule language. But I do think that a presumption or an accounting for or some starting place of single well financial assurance for an option 5 in accordance with the option structure is something that we could probably well work into the SBP that guides the commissioners and the operators in terms of how the option 5 is going to be administered. So that'd be my opinion on that, but I don't have a terrible concern with kind of the discussion or really the theme where I think most of us are landing in that regard. So I propose to make prohibitive for, make it prohibitive for, and then I'm comfortable with the unique being redundant. I think exceptional is probably the more appropriate defining word there. So that's kind of.
So why don't we try to, as we go through these various topics, I think, we're not going to defer to additional redlining by staff. So I think we should try to land on something that we can all be comfortable with that direction. I've not had a chance to weigh in. I appreciate the make prohibitive for. I think I would sort of rather see the use of the other options creates a plan that is unnecessary or unreasonable. I like falling back upon the definition of SB 19181. And those are words that are directly from that. And so I appreciate the creativity of Commissioner McGowan in coming up with that. I think we're kind of like half of us here, half of us there. I could go, both ways on that, I suppose. Would like to hear from others about the differences between the two. And then I am, with regard to the low producing and option 5, I like the concept of tucking the notion that it is the intent of the commission that low producing wells are to be accounted for in all options, including option 5. And so if you're coming forth with a bespoke plan, you need to come forth with something that addresses low producing wells. So I would prefer that be in the SBP and that it doesn't need to be articulated much further from this commissioner's perspective. And with that, I hate to do this, but I have another matter that I have to attend to for about 20 minutes, starting at 10 a.m. And so with the commission's pleasure, I would like to call for a morning break. It's 9:59. And I would ask that we return at 10:20, and then we can take up the rest of this conversation. And my apologies to all for this unfortunate circumstance that I've got myself into. We will get back up with the recording being in progress, and we will continue with our thoughts and deliberations on the option 5 issue that is on the table. I have no idea who had the floor, so whoever wants to raise their hand can have the floor. Director Murphy.
Chair, I tend to kind of roughly keep track of where things are at. For me, it seemed that there were 3 for make prohibitive for instead of unnecessary and reasonable. So that's why I've stricken through unnecessary and unreasonable. There were at least 3 folks who were supportive of striking unique. And again, 3 is my threshold, right? For better or worse. It's great if we get to 5, but at 3, I stopped counting. I'm unclear about whether, I think that there's consensus that ensuring that operators understand that in an option 5 scenario, there, the commission wants to evaluate where they would fall within the options 1 through 4 in conjunction with and especially relating to low producing wells, when considering what the operator is putting forward as their option 5 plan. It's unclear to me whether more of you are in favor of that being in the SVP or in the rule. So that, like I said, I think that language goes somewhere, it's just where. And then my last question since we're in 702D5 is making sure that the commissioners are okay with my requested clarification about low producing in the transfer section. I'll probably take silence as support on that, just a warning.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think I want to make sure I understood staff's clarification, which is if you're in the option 5 and there's a transfer of low producing wells, are we requiring single financial assurance for that low producing well, or does it fit into the portfolio or the plan that was adopted by the commission?
I'm going to go back to Rule 218 to answer this question, Commissioner McGowan, which says that single well financial assurance is required for all low producing wells unless an approved financial assurance plan accounts for it otherwise, or something else, and the or is escaping me. And so to me, it's just making sure that it's clear that 702C, 702D5B little 2 connects to that low producing threshold requirement in 218. And so that unless there's an approved plan, low producing wells would require single well financial assurance if transferred.
But if their plan is approved, then it gets folded into their plan,
Right.
like we are doing with every other option.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll try to answer a few questions here. I think I'm kind of where you are, Chairman Robbins, as far as the unreasonable, unnecessary versus the prohibitive. I mean, I see some merit to mirroring language that's in the act, which is and utilizing unnecessary and unreasonable. I mean, I think that still captures our intent. And so I can be okay with that unless another commissioner, has a strong opinion on that. And I'm certainly willing to listen to that. I'm also okay with that. The presumptive single well financial assurance requirements being included in the statement of basis and purpose. I mean, I think it's been clear through deliberations and where I think commissioners are on this, that's the intent. And so I think it just needs to be clear that that's the intent so that no operator has any confusion around that. I do have a suggestion regarding 702D5II. I mean, I understand the intent there. And one thing, while it says insert low producing, I don't see low producing in there. But there's language that's existing in all of the other options, around this same thing. So for example, in option 1, it says for transferred low producing wells, single well financial assurance for any low producing well that exceeds the threshold set forth in rule. And it says 702T1B a, and was subject to a transfer of operatorship approved by the director pursuant to Rule 218G. I mean, that if we can, it may make more sense to maintain that consistent language, but instead of referencing the rules for either option 1 through 4, reference the rule for option 5, because option 5 will necessarily include consideration of single well financial assurance for low producing wells based on what we've deliberated here and what will be included in the statement of basis and purpose. And that may be a cleaner, more consistent way to address that, but certainly open to thoughts and conversations around that. If I made any sense at all.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. I thought I saw Commissioner Najapa's hand raised after you talked about the unnecessary unreasonable, so we call upon Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Messner. You know, I do appreciate the idea of bringing in the language from SB 19181. I think the part that makes me uncomfortable is the unnecessary. I think to me, what we're putting forward here is what is the necessary financial assurance. And so what we're really getting at is what's unreasonable, which to me is what the language that Commissioner Gonzalez has suggested is getting at. So that's just one opinion. If we're now in the minority, that's okay. But I believe that unnecessary piece, that just gives me a little heartburn.
And Commissioner Najapa, can I ask you to sort of amplify on the concern about the unnecessary?
Because I think that in putting forward this structure for financial assurance, we are suggesting that these are the necessary and reasonable amounts. I think what we're getting at with option 5 is due to the operator's circumstances, what makes that unworkable. But I would argue that doesn't mean it's not necessary, you know, or that the amounts that we are requiring are not necessary. And so that we're in option 5, you know, entertaining a different solution that they may come up with. But I guess I'm a little troubled by suggesting that an operator can say our sort of baseline plan is unnecessary. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the part that just gives me a little trouble.
Okay. I think I'm still okay with it because ultimately the decision maker is going to be us as opposed to the operator. And, you know, they can come forward with something and say that application of the option, you know, 2 creates X, and that's unreasonable and unnecessary, but ultimately it's going to be our decision in terms of whether that is indeed the case or not. But again, you know, that's, you know, kind of where I am. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I like the unnecessary and reasonable language because that is what is in Senate Bill 181, that these rules are built on necessary and reasonable rules. I think then it's up to the operator to say, yes, the structure that you had is necessary for everybody, but for me and the situation and my financial health or whatever evidence they're going to show in their financial plan would show that it was unnecessary for them to take another option or unreasonable. That being said, I'm not sure I'm going to die on my sword over it. So if people have really strong feelings one way or the other, both of these seem like, I think after this discussion, hopefully people understand the intent of what the option 5 is for. So.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yeah, thanks, Robbins. To Chair Robbins, I am, you know, I'm comfortable with both language. I had chosen my language deliberately, but I can see, I can see benefits for the unreasonable and unnecessary threshold as well. I don't know that I kind of initially shared the same concerns as Commissioner Najapa. I don't know that I still have those concerns after giving it some thought over this last break. When I think about unnecessary and unreasonable, and I think about that as it may pertain to a specific operator and their circumstances, I think this kind of goes to the same kind of theme that we were trying to capture one way or another, whether it's my language or Commissioner McGowan's language. I'm kind of going to be indifferent on it, but I think it accounts for essentially and again, this is not the words we're going to use in the rule, but it's kind of how it makes sense in my mind, is the inappropriate application of one of those options to an operator's specific circumstances. So, you know, as one commissioner, I'm comfortable with either language, however we go. So if there are strong preferences, I think we're going to be in the right spot either way.
Okay, in order to, go ahead, Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to move on to another piece on the same slide, but I'm good with wherever we land on that, on the language. Is that
Okay,
okay?
well-
May I? Okay.
Before we move, I want to try to, so we don't get to like punt today. We've got to make decisions. And so I think I've heard 3 soft medium votes for unnecessary or unreasonable without too much objection from the other 2 commissioners. So I would suggest we land there on that issue. And seeing no vigorous head shaking in the negative fashion, we now can move to something else on this slide.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the piece about the presumptive single well financial assurance for low producing wells, I agree that that needs to be addressed in the SBP. I'm wondering if we also want to say in the rule language that a financial assurance plan must address low producing wells per the presumptive requirements for the operator based on their production threshold. And I'm sure Director Murphy will wordsmith that more elegantly, but I think it could be useful to also have that in rule language in terms of requirements of what needs to be addressed. And then how they do it obviously is going to be up to the operator to demonstrate and to provide details when they present their plan. But I'm wondering if it's also useful to have that in the rule language, and I'll just throw that out there for if other people have any opinions on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Nanchapa. My only thought about that is bespoke is indeed bespoke. And I don't necessarily, so just as one commissioner, the concept of must is, I think, should be something like consider or should consider, because I want to allow for this commission to be creative in the finalization of an option 5 plan. I think it's a very important concept. I think it's consistent with all of our other things, but making it a shall is not where I initially land as I think about these sorts of things. Others with thoughts? Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I'm landing at the same spot you are in that regard. I think that the considerations should be clearly outlined in the SBP in terms of giving that direction. And I thought we were kind of getting there with Commissioner Messner's suggestion. Although the presumption and the must are challenging when I think about the intent of this option 5 rule, or at least how it makes sense in my mind. I think strong considerations, right? And like we've done with other things, and including OGDPs, and like we'll do here when these come before us as well, the opportunity to kind of set expectations on what that means and what that looks like, and hopefully sooner rather than later, so that there's not too much back and forth or unnecessary reworks, and that the expectations are clear. But I think we can start expressing that expectation in the SBP with really the list of considerations. So I would be comfortable going so far as to saying that an option 5 plan will identify and perhaps account for low producing wells. I'm not quite sure what the right language is there, but I think it's important that we understand the low producing well component of an operator's portfolio in reviewing option 5 plans. So to the extent that's kind of what this is getting at, that's where I'm landing on it.
Director Murphy?
I kind of unraised my hand because I was going to put another option.
I'm not calling upon you.
Okay.
Mute yourself. Commissioner McGowan or Commissioner Messner, would you like to weigh in? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I'm reading this, I mean, maybe a path forward would be in rule state option 5 financial assurance plans will consider low producing wells consistent with what would be required in options 1 through 4 based on the operator's production, and then provide more detail similar to what's included here in the statement of basis and purpose consistent with that rule language. And so that's a will consider. And to me, that that addresses it, I think, holistically between the statement of basis of purpose and the rule language, so that there's no confusion for an operator that's looking to utilize the option 5 structure as to what the expectation would be.
Commissioner McGowan, I see a thumbs up. Okay, I think we've got kind of consensus, like real consensus, not solid against consensus around the will consider approach. I do want to check in with AAG Davenport as well as Director Murphy about how it is we're building a ship and sailing it at the same time. And what I'm getting at is you're getting kind of additional direction from commissioners on these discrete topics. Is a preferred idea about how we get through this and get to a landing spot today, tomorrow, et cetera, that we provide this direction, we get done with our issue list, we take a short break and allow AAG Stafford, as well as others on your team, Director Murphy, to like redline, and then we come back and we say, yep, that got it. Is that an approach that could work for us today?
Sure, that would be my,
Murphy, I'm looking at you.
that would be my preference, to work through all of the issues. I'd prefer to not have the anxiety of like redlining on screen during a hearing. So if we can get through the direction, staff can go back, work those edits in, walk through that Word document with final edits, with AAG Kyle's or AAG Davenport's blessing, take a vote on that rule document, and then recognizing that I think, and this is where I would defer to AAG Davenport quite a bit, a final vote on the rules as finalized, hopefully today, with latitude to make conforming changes, clean up citations, if there are rule citation cleanups that we identify in that kind of last proofread, and then SBP, making conforming changes to the SBP. So that would be my suggestion.
And with regard to the SBP, I am comfortable as one commissioner, and I'm going to look to my other commissioners right now. Let's go ahead and get this off the table, of direction from us that we've identified the final rules, if we go about the path you just directed, Director Murphy, and that the final motion would say staff is granted alternative or leeway to create conforming changes to SBP that are ensure that the SBP is consistent with the final rules that we've adopted. And I believe, and I would look to AAG Davenport, that is consistent with the way that we have done SBPs previously with mission change.
Thank you, Chair. That is in the Commission's long history, as far as I'm aware, of rulemakings, motions that approve the actual language in the rule and then instruct staff and the AG's office to revise the SBP consistent with the Commission's direction is consistent with longstanding past practice.
And
So
that is consistent with the Administrative Procedures Act.
and is fine under the APA.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that approach then, as terms of how we're going to get through today, as well as the SBP? Oh, Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I just clarify that the commission gets a chance to read the SBP and make sure that we feel that everything got caught or that it did reflect our conversations?
AAG Davenport?
Yes, confirmed. The Commission will have that opportunity.
Okay. I'm not trying to rush, but if we are through, I'm also trying to ensure we're moving forward in a consistent manner. So with that, I think I'd like to recognize Commissioner Gonzalez for the next of the specific issues that he indicated early on that he would bring to the table. Not that we're not going to have other folks that can have issues as well, but let's just run with Commissioner Gonzalez's lead, and then we can see what other mop-up matters we might have after he's done.
Yep, happy to continue that, Chair. I'll go to an easy one so we can kind of knock things off as best we can, or at least what I think is an easy one. In the definition of the depths associated with single well financial assurance, the 0 to 4,000, 4,000, 8,000, 8,000 plus, it references total depth in that language. I think it was my intent for sure, and I think that how that total depth is interpreted under current rules is total vertical depth. We're talking about the vertical portion of that wellbore in terms of determining that depth. And so my suggestion is that we add the word vertical in between total and depth for each one of those sub bullets.
I got booted off the meeting. I just rejoined.
Do you need a recap, Chair? Or are you with us?
I'm not with us. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So in the definition of single well financial assurance, we talk about depths there in terms of the determining factor for the amounts of the wellbore single well financial assurance. That should be total vertical depth as opposed to total depth. So there's no confusion between total vertical depth and total measured depth. I think that's appropriate. I think it's the way we've all kind of talked about it. So I think it's an important clarification.
Was everybody else on board, Commissioner Gonzalez?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Murphy, can I move on from that one? Okay, so the next one I'm going to go to is going to be 434D3F with regard to the out of service list and specifically the delay of repair list identification that we talked about in deliberation. I'm not quite sure that this language captured what our deliberations were, and I confirmed that with a couple stakeholders, including the affiliated local governments who put forward a lot of the language we were talking about adopting. And so I have a pretty simple solution for it that I'd like to share my screen on, Director Murphy, and walk through if that's possible. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. Let's see, share screen. This might be the first time I've done this.
I think this is the first screen sharing of a commissioner throughout this rulemaking, so I'm very impressed.
Well, it's certainly mine. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this a try. Let's make sure this is the right one. Okay, can you guys see what I'm looking? Can you guys see essentially my cursor next to the F here?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna move my screens over so I don't see you guys. But my suggestion is that we delete. Oh, I just want to capture that W, but I'll just do it this way. I think that this is what we had contemplated, taking out what's highlighted in blue, whether the operator has placed a leak on the out of service well or a well site containing a well designated on the plugging list, on a delay of repair list in accordance with the CDPHE, Reg 7, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is what we were talking about. I think this is what we landed on deliberation. I think we had some consensus from stakeholders in that regard. I think this is really all we need to clear up that language and to get it to where at least I think we were at from deliberations.
Other commissioners with thoughts? I am in agreement. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Okay. I can't see everyone on my screen, so Chair, let me know if we're moving on.
I'm looking around. I'm seeing thumbs up.
Okay. So the next component is going to be in 7E. So 7E mirrors a lot of the same, kind of mirrored the same language we just saw, but it refers to the form 6B, whereas the previous section referred to the form 6A, which is the initial report of the out of service list and the appropriate information provided there. This is basically the updates of that through the 6B. And I just think it needs to mirror that same language. And so I would suggest basically striking the same thing that I had suggested in the previous one. And so that would look like, if I can get my cursor working, that with the deletion of the blue section.
I think that's consistent.
I think it's a consistent and conforming edit, and it kind of ties the 6A, the Form 6 process in general.
Everybody good? Nodding of heads in the up and down fashion.
Okay, Director Murphy, we're good with that? You caught? All right. I'm gonna stop sharing then. Okay, well, good. That was an easy one. Let me find my notes again. And I'm gonna strike that so I don't repeat myself. And the next one I will go to is, let's see. So I'm gonna go to seismic insurance. Director Murphy, did you have that in your spreadsheet? You could pull that up quickly. So I have concerns with a couple pieces of language and the way that shook out. One is the term seismic operations. I think that could be viewed as limiting to actual operations in which seismic research is being conducted, as opposed to seismicity, which I think is the concern for offset impacts. And so my proposal is to, here, I've got language here. So I'll read along. All operators will maintain general liability insurance coverage for property damage, bodily injury to third parties, and sudden or accidental pollution that requires remediation, with no exclusion for claims arising from operator-caused seismicity, in the minimum amount of $5 million per occurrence. The coverage required by this rule, it goes on, umbrella or excess policy. And I want to say operator caused seismicity, I'm sorry, I missed this, from oil or gas wells. And I think that accounts for essentially production wells that produce oil, gas, CBM, other products, as defined in our rules. And we don't have to outline a specific exclusion for injection wells, because I think that gets a little bit clumsy in that language. And I think if we specify the seismicity from oil or gas wells, that we get to the right spot there. Strike the last sentence.
All right. Are folks comfortable with this? Okay. Continue, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I want to make sure that seismic operations is not the language that's included there. So I want to make sure you got it, Director Murphy. If you are good, then I will move on. Okay. So the next one is in regards to this financial capability certification language. There's two components of that. One that was brought up to me, and one that I had concerns with. And so this is first part. I don't have a strong memory as to where we landed, because we talked about a lot of things. But I'd like to open up discussion on if the net worth criteria was intended to be captured in the rule language or not. I don't think it was, but I couldn't recall, because we did talk about a number of metrics. I think I expressed some concern about identifying a specific metric. My concerns when I read this initially over the weekend were more about confidentiality, but I thought it was a good time to bring that up and make sure that our deliberations were reflected in the new proposed rule language.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I think I suggested this to be included in all of the options. And to clarify my intent, which I think Commissioner Gonzalez, you're correct on. It was, I did not include a requirement for the current net worth as demonstrated through financial statements to be included in this. Now, I did talk about, and I think was captured by Director Murphy, some information to be provided in the statement of basis and purpose for further clarifying how an operator can meet this obligation, not limited to, but including. But I would suggest that the certification of financial capability language would state that an operator will provide a certification of financial capability signed by an operator's corporate officer to ensure it is financially capable of meeting all of the obligations imposed by the Act and Commission's rules. And to me, that captures the two elements that I was interested in seeing in there, which is one, the certification of financial capability, and two, signed by an operator's corporate officer.
Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the general discussion and the removal of the specific current net worth in this and other related sections. I had a slight different suggestion, although I like the elegance of what Commissioner Messner just suggested, but I was thinking to leave the first sentence as it is. An operator will provide a certification of financial capability to ensure it is financially capable of meeting all the obligations imposed by the Act and Commission rules, period. And then the second sentence, the certification will be signed by an operator's corporate officer and will attest that all information is true and accurate as of the date of signature. So that's just a suggestion for consideration.
What are folks' thoughts? I mean, I sort of think that's a boots and suspenders approach, because if you're doing a certification, it ought to be true. Director Murphy, you raised your hand, or did you not?
I did. I have a little hesitation requiring it to be true and accurate in this context. I think there are other places where you attestations and certifications in the rules, and that's kind of like bound up in them. And I would be concerned about this creating a presumption that it's different from all the other places that we do want an attestation or a certification. And just as a reminder to the whole world, all of our forms require that level of that expectation, that whoever's submitting it is submitting it a true and accurate copy to the extent that they know it. And so I just want to reiterate that that is our expectation every time an operator sends us something. And it would be equally true in this scenario as well.
With that clarification, Commissioner Nanjapa, are you comfortable?
I'm good with Commissioner Messner's suggestion, given what Director Murphy just mentioned. So thanks.
Okay. Okay, I think we've got some consensus around that issue. Commissioner Gonzalez, do you want to lead on?
Sure. So the second part of the financial capability certification is specific to option 5 and the language or addition of an unmodified opinion. A number of stakeholders over the weekend were concerned, I guess, maybe not concerned, but confused about this. It's my understanding that this may be more of a nuanced phrase used in the accounting world, and I was hoping that that Director Murphy could help address this, either explain it and we can decide if that's clear enough for us to keep it in the rules, or maybe work through an alternative to make sure we all have the same understanding.
Thanks for the question. And Ms. Larson, can you elevate Jarrett Ellis on for us? Oh, great, there he is. So in working through this, I've kind of relied on his expertise in the accounting world for what this means to professionals in that space, because it's not intuitive for me either. And with that, I'd say, Jared, do you want to jump in and try to explain what an unmodified opinion is, and your thoughts on it?
And Mr. Ellis, if you could introduce yourself to our 69 stakeholders that are listening in.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. My name is Jarrett Ellis. I'm the finance manager at COGCC, and thank you, Director Murphy and Commissioner Gonzalez, for the question. You're correct that this is a really nuanced piece, but I think it's important to understand. An auditor doesn't certify or guarantee an entity's financial statements. An auditor doesn't take responsibility for an entity's financial statements. An auditor simply issues an opinion on whether financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with whatever financial reporting standards are used. Before an auditor issues an opinion, they have to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement due to either fraud or error. An auditor issues an unmodified opinion when he or she concludes that the statements are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with the accounting standards, whether they're US generally accepted accounting principles or international financial reporting standards. The AICPA requires the auditor to modify their opinion when the auditor concludes that, based on the evidence they obtained, the financial statements as a whole are materially misstated, or if they're unable to obtain sufficient evidence to opine on the financial statements. So in those circumstances, an auditor modifies its opinion to reflect that it's either a qualified opinion, which would be the financial statements fairly represent except for, or it would be an adverse opinion, which the financial statements do not fairly represent the finances of the company, or they would issue a disclaimer of an opinion, which is they could not obtain the sufficient evidence. So an unmodified opinion is simply the auditor stating that the financial statements fairly represent the finances of the company. Does that help? Or is that a little too detailed?
Sure.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Well, I mean, that helps me tremendously. I thought that all made a lot of sense. And it was very different actually than what I was thinking about. So I really appreciate the explanation there. I was interpreting it one way and I was thinking, well, this makes clear to me. But again, that's the trouble of making assumptions that the way you're thinking is the right way of interpreting it. Would it be appropriate, and I'll pose this to my fellow commissioners because I'm kind of thinking this might be where I'm leaning in my mind, to really just take what Mr. Ellis just told us and explain that in the SBP, basically a section on unmodified opinion, walk through, the accounting practices, what the different types of opinion he outlined mean and why an unmodified opinion is important.
Thumbs up all the way around, except for Commissioner Messner's raising his hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I don't have a problem with that in the statement of basis of purpose, but I just had a question as to why this is only appropriate for option 5 if it's an important inclusion. Why wouldn't we just carry that through all of the options?
Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Commissioner Masser, for that question. I guess that was my initial assumption, and I may have missed that we were only talking about option 5, but I would agree that it should be carried through.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
If it is carried through on all 5 or 6 options, I'm not quite sure if it's included in option 6. But if it is carried through, would it be best as be a part of the support for financial documents or the supporting financial documents that we mentioned and reference in the SBP, as kind of the certification is what it is, right? And it's certified and attested to by a corporate officer. But then what we talk about what that means in the SBP in terms of which financial statements, including but not limited to, would be helpful and influential in supporting that those financial statements then come from an unmodified opinion. Any opinions on that? I think that might help clear things out so that our language is consistent across all of them, and we don't venture into kind of a more prescriptive rule for this certification that may be greater than kind of what we're intending, and may not have the leeway for different companies to present different financial information. Just a thought.
Director Murphy?
Thanks. Commissioner Mesner, if I can provide some background or my recollections of how these conversations unfolded over the course of the last month or so. I think that there was a clear communication that I heard from Commission that in the construct of an option 5 plan, wanting a more rigorous financial analysis to be provided to the Commission that didn't require the Commission to develop its own expertise to assess that financial health. And that's why staff ultimately recommended in option 5, the specific information around the financial assurance plan. Fast forward to last week, the commissioners specifically wanted that kind of same certification in options 1 through 4 and 6, but didn't necessarily believe it was necessary to go to that next kind of financial assurance level, believing my inference is that the Commission understood that options 1 through 4 and 6 provided kind of the financial picture that we were comfortable with. And so that's how I've understood the distinction for treating 5 slightly differently and having a more rigorous financial health assessment included as part of its financial assurance plan submittals. Again, I'm just trying to provide context for where I think we landed and why specifically the Commission directed last week to not include the audited or the unmodified opinions for anything but 5.
Commissioner Gonzalez, did you want to respond?
I was just nodding along in that regard. I was thinking about that, and I think that, I don't recall asking for, unmodified opinion, because that was the first time I heard that language, but I think that may have been an interpretation of maybe what we were talking about. But we did talk about a higher threshold for really a demonstration of an operator's financial situation as part of its exceptional circumstances for an option 5 consideration. Perhaps that's where it should go. The certification of financial capability otherwise does not require, as far as I know, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, audited financials in terms of that support, and perhaps that audited financial threshold being a little bit higher for option 5 is appropriate than for the other 4 options where they are following really the letter of the rules as we've drafted them.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on those comments, I tend to agree. I think that was the nature of the discussion that we had. And so I'm comfortable with just leaving the language as is in the rule specific to option 5, but creating that narrative in the statement of basis and purpose that further clarifies that for operators as indicated by Mr. Ellis.
I'm good too. Others? All right, got thumbs up all the way around. Director Murphy, are you good on this issue? Commissioner Gonzalez?
Chair, I'll take us to the next item on my list, which is something we had talked about, but I think we may have gotten distracted in our discussions, and I'm not quite sure where it landed, if it was rule language or SBP, and I think it was probably supposed to be SBP language, which may be why I haven't seen it yet. But in regard to the Rule 306 additional financial assurance may be required specific to an OGDP application. There was some concern about when this may come due, and I think that we had discussed at least lightly some SBP language that would basically make it a COA prior to dirt work or prior to actual activities taking place, as opposed to someone just applying for the application and having to pony up that financial assurance, additional financial assurance specific to that OGDP, and then not execute on the OGDP. So that was a concern that had come up. I recall talking about it. I'm not recall where we landed on it. And I'm seeing, are you trying to show me a bullet point here, Director Murphy? Okay. That answers my question. That we talked about it and that we talked about putting in the SBP.
Great. One and done. Next.
The next one, again, another one, I don't recall where we landed on it, but didn't see it in the rules. And this is in regard to the to the payment or the I guess execution of financial assurance after the plan approval. We heard testimony about the timing and the coordination of getting these amounts bonded up and supported through financial assurance. And there was a suggestion of moving it from 30 days to 90 days. Recall bringing it up. I don't recall where the discussion went. Didn't see it in the rules, so I wanted to throw that out for a discussion amongst us.
Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez, for raising this. I also spoke with some stakeholders over the weekend about this matter as well, and remember that conversation. I think especially when Mr. Gilstrap was presenting and talking about kind of the time frames that it might take. And so I would be supportive of increasing where we are suggesting 30 days. Although I like how I think in general we had related to transfers like a as soon as practicable phrasing in there, and so that it could be something like within 90 days or as soon as practicable, something like that.
Director Murphy.
Thanks, Chair. I flipped screens to show where in the rules I think the relevant language is, and it's in subpart B of the informational requirements in 702D for each of the individual plan options. So again, this would be whatever change that, if the commission ultimately directs a change to the language as you see on screen in subpart B, we would want to make that conforming change throughout, but wanted everybody to take a look at where I believe the language at issue is. And again, to orient us, we're talking about 702D parts 1 through 6 sub B. And so I'll probably snip this screen and pop it into the PowerPoint and then move into the discussion about what it should reach. Or sorry, it's only in 1, 2, 5, and 6, I think.
Okay, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Jared, and thanks, Commissioner Nanjapa, for that reference. In this regard, in terms of getting the financial assurance in the door, I think that as soon as practicable is a little too open-ended for me. I think I would like to cap it at 90 days. And if an operator is getting close to that 90 days or fails to comply for that 90 days, I think we have an opportunity. And I think this would wholly fall within our variance kind of bullets of what must be shown, because if they are unable to attain these, that's that's undue hardship, that's unable to comply with the rules. I think that's an appropriate off-ramp through a variance in that regard. So kind of my 2 cents on it is I'm comfortable moving it from 30 to 90 days. I think as soon as practicable, maybe a little bit too open-ended.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. I need to be more precise in my language, and I appreciate your discussion on that. What I really meant was within 90 days or sooner, I guess, if that makes sense. And so I would defer to AAG Stafford and Director Murphy on the specific verbiage, but I think that is my intent as well, within 90 days.
So it's more that it would be within as soon as practicable, but no later than 90 days.
Yeah, I think that would do it. Thank you.
Just no later than 90 days cover that?
I think it's just giving a little incentive that we want to see it as soon as you can get it together. All right, we got thumbs up on that. Director Murphy, you're not screen sharing, so I'm just checking in. Did you capture that? Are you good?
Yeah, I took the opportunity to not type with 75 people watching me.
You're gonna not know what to do with yourself once this is over.
Oh, it's going to be so crazy.
Okay, Commissioner Gonzalez.
All right, I've got two more of these, a little bit meatier. Again, right, I'm still trying to stick to the same framework that we landed on, that we deliberated on, and we spent a lot of time getting to. These are just a little bit meatier clarifications, so I'll throw these out there, and then I think I'll be done with my list. So the first one is in regards to the transfer language under 218 B5A3 with regard to operators in options 3 or 4 receiving wells through transfer. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I actually think that the rule as written doesn't necessarily go to the extent of what we were trying to accomplish, which specifies that the transferred wells would roll into a buying operator's time frame. I think that's okay, because I think that I'm going to suggest we keep that rule the same, that language, and that there's a couple sub bullets that I would suggest adding to that. So the first is that I heard an argument this weekend that was pretty influential to me and really made me pivot on the way I was thinking about this transfer rule, right? You know, the way we were all thinking about it in terms of single well financial assurance being the most important component of a transfer and making sure that those low producing wells are accounted for, is that when an operator is a buying operator in options 3 or 4, that essentially they're almost penalized for taking on a transfer more so than an operator who may have, or for an operator who's been in option 3 or 4 for longer is at a lesser situation than an operator who's been at option 3 or 4 for a shorter amount of time. Meaning that an operator who takes on wells may in fact have the opportunity to reduce the time frame associated with the transferred wells and bonding them up to single well financial assurance if that operator has a shorter time frame under their current financial assurance plan. Now, the opposite's true. If the operator has a longer time frame over that financial assurance plan, then they are required to essentially bond up at a faster pace than was the single well financial assurance for the selling operator. So one of the concerns that popped up around this was the potential for operators to essentially create new operators. Now, maybe not one operator create another operator, but essentially newer operators having the advantage of taking over transferred wells, right? Because if they're incorporating that into their own financial assurance plan, if they're already an option 3 or 4 operator or not, then essentially they're going to be taking on a longer time frame and will have the full advantage of the 10 or 20 years as contemplated in our rules. So what I want to suggest is adding to that sub bullet 3, 2 more sub bullets that specify 2 specific situations that I think could close this gap. So the first one would be the first sub bullet, and basically what I have that written, and it needs to be cleaned up just a little bit, but I'll let you follow along, Director Murphy, as I read this out. Is if the selling operator had an approved financial assurance plan under options 3 or 4, then the buying operator must assume the selling operator's timeline for that single well financial assurance under the selling operator's existing financial assurance plan. And the buying operator at transfer must fund their financial assurance to an amount equal to or greater than the single well financial assurance amount that applied to the transferred wells prior to transfer. You got all that, Director Murphy? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put this on a different screen so that we can get it out of my notes and see it a little bit better. Maybe that'll help. So give me 1 second. I'm going to figure this out and I'll share my screen again. Da-da-da. Okay, so now sharing my screen and talking through all of it. Okay, can everyone see this kind of 3 bullet points that I have here? All right, so this is the first bullet point that I was mentioning. And really what I want to account for here is that a selling operator has already built up the financial assurance, and that a buying operator is going to take that financial assurance on, either privately negotiated, they're going to take it from the selling operator, they're going to bond up to that amount. So that accounts for one situation. And I'll let everyone read that, and then I'll go to my the next bullet, and we can talk through that as well. So the next bullet is in a situation where the selling operator was already under an option 3 or 4. Let me make sure I'm reading this correct, because these were in my notes. So if the selling operator was under an option other than 3 or 4, that's right. So this was under the consideration where you have a blanket bond operator selling to a single well financial assurance option 3 or 4 operator, is that blanket bond operator is only going to have above threshold single well financial assurance. So they're not going to be bonded to the same extent as a selling operator under options 3 or 4. So basically under this situation, this is when the buying operator would then incorporate the non-single well financially assured transferred wells into their timeline in accordance with their pre-transfer financial assurance plan. Now, this all assumes that this can change through a modified financial assurance plan under 218 that is required as part of the Form 9 process. But in order to really capture and codify what I think this would look like going from an option 3 or 4 operator to an option 3 or 4 operator, or an option 1 or 2 operator, or an option 5 or 6 really into an option 3 or 4 operator, I think this kind of covers those 2 gaps that created some concerns with this language that I hadn't thought about previously when talking through this in deliberations last week. I know that's a lot. Take a look, give it some thought, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or at least kind of walk through my thought process. Hopefully better.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this up, Mr. Gonzalez, because it's something that I was trying to express last week and maybe wasn't doing a very good job. So I'm glad that you brought it up again. I think for me, one other nuance is when there's a transfer from a non 3 or 4 option to a 3 or 4 operator. I guess I don't think it should start exactly from 0 and then you have your 20 or 10-year plan to work up to your full amount. That's why I was talking about some sort of a down payment, like a 20%, or maybe if it was a blanketly bonded well, whatever tier that well fell into, maybe that's where it needs to start off with when it gets transferred. So if it was like someone had, everyone knows the amounts within the blanket. So if it's a 0 to 50 wells and it's $1,500 per well, maybe that's the starting amount that has to get transferred with the well, or that the buyer has to put into the trust or sinking fund.
I have an idea. I don't know if I'm on mute still.
You're good.
Okay, perfect. So what if in that scenario where an option not 3 or 4 is transferred into an option 3 or 4, if basically that it is the transferred wells must be incorporated into the single well financial assurance timeline as if they were part of the original portfolio. So basically, you're looking at that same percentage contribution. So if you're an option 3 or 4 operator taking from a blanket bonded, or an option 5 bespoke bonded, or an option 6 comp bonded operator, that basically you're taking that on and you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to have to single well financial assure up to a certain percentage based on my timeline as soon as these wells hit my portfolio. That way, the entire portfolio is on the same timeline track and has the same level of protections in the same schedule as we've contemplated.
Commissioner McGowan.
I'd rather leave the language the way that you have originally submitted it, if that's where you're going.
I was thinking about adding something a little bit to that, and maybe if I'm looking at here where it says transferred wells into their single well financial assurance timeline, I might suggest something single transfer wells into their single well financial assurance timeline as if they were a part of the original pre-approved pre-transfer financial assurance plan. It's really complicated to talk through all this. Go ahead, Commissioner McGowan, sorry.
So I think this is what I was struggling with last week. If the operator has a 10-year plan and they're in year 7 and they get the transferred well, then they have to come up with 70% of the single well financial assurance, which I'm also struggling with from an equity standpoint with what's happening with other transfers with other level operators, option operators. And so that's why I was suggesting maybe some sort of a down payment. And then it gets on, those wells are on the 10 or the 20-year schedule. And so I think you're back at, it's easier then for someone who starts a new company to say, I'll take all those transferred wells because I'm not in year 7 of a plan. And I get to start at 0 with all those wells. So I hope I made my point, and I'll listen to what others have to say.
Can I throw out one additional counter idea based on that, Commissioner McGowan, is maybe the idea of having at least language in there. So at least 20% single well financial assurance at that time, kind of whatever is based on whatever's greater. So if you do have a new operator, right? It's new operator, and everything is within that time frame. It's not that big of a deal. It's going to stay within that time frame. But if you do have an operator who is 7 years in, right, and it's going to take a lot of money to bond that up, we don't necessarily want to discourage that transfer or encourage kind of juking the system with newer operators being leveraged into creating that transfer in a more beneficial way, and just saying at least that amount or incorporate it into the single well financial assurance. Now I'm trying to find that trigger of kind of where the lesser than or equal to kind of plays into that calculus. And so I would have to play with the language to get there. I hadn't contemplated that, but just wanted to throw out that idea for discussion. I think that could get to maybe a place that gives some certainty to stakeholders in terms of what that protection is going to look like and adherence to the timeline, but also not require an exorbitant amount on the front end that's not part of the, it's really going to be a detrimental amount.
Commissioner Gonzalez, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
The one thing that I struggle with today is we've built this rubric. It is, I think, very protective. It has a lot of different pieces, and I get concerned about unintended consequences. If we pull something here, it may create an issue over here that we weren't thinking about. Have you thought through that with regard to this proposal?
Well, I mean, I want to say yes, because I have thought about it. But at the same time, I thought I had last week with the proposal that I had made with the language that made it into the rules, right? And so I don't want to go so far as to say, yeah, this is going to work 100% of the time, and that, I haven't screwed up another lever, somewhere else in the rules by suggesting this. So no, I'm not certain on that, Chair. And I do appreciate that concern. I have that concern in general across any suggestions that we're going to take on today, which is why I'm very, very, very trepidatious about moving forward with these kind of changes. But it was a problem that was brought up. It was a problem that influenced me to think maybe there's a tweak needed here. I don't know that I landed at the right spot. So if anyone else was thinking about that over the weekend, I'd love some help on kind of where you guys landed.
Commissioner Messner, then Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez, for kind of diving into this. So, I mean, I have given some thought to this over the weekend, and I think that there is problems with starting to pull levers and starting to have issues associated with it. And so to me, there's check and balance necessary with this concept. I mean, I think generally speaking, the way that we've developed this financial assurance concept holistically is we're necessarily developing single well financial assurance for all low producing wells, but also for lower producing wells. So as they get into option 3 and 4, we're necessarily creating single well financial assurance associated with those operators. I think we need to stay true to that concept. I think that I think that the current construct does allow for an operator to annually ask for a modification to their financial assurance plan as an option 3 or 4 operator with a hearing before the commission. I think that if a transfer modifies their portfolio enough that it's problematic for them and they need to have an adjustment in their financial assurance plan, I think that there's a tool available to that. I mean, I am concerned about the potential for some gamesmanship here where you've got a new operator coming in, starting a company, asking for option 3 or option 4 based on a certain amount of transfers that are coming from an option 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 operator, and then just continually doing that as a way to potentially game the system. But I think that we have the ability through our analysis of transfers and our analysis of how we're going to address the initial financial assurance plan associated with option 3 and 4, that if even if the director's looking at it, if they utilize the presumed timeframes of 20 years and 10 years, if it's clear that there's something not right there, that director has the ability to kick that up to us as a further evaluation by the commission for an operator that is, I think, trying to game the system by just continuing to create new companies in order to be able to be lower on the financial assurance timeline associated with option 3 and 4. I really tried to creatively come up with some ways to, I think, address the core issue that you're trying to deal with. But I think because we're starting these rules out, everyone's basically on the same playing field for at least a few years here. I think I tend to lean towards let's let this play out for a few years. And if there is a clear issue that needs to be addressed, I think we've got some points in the next 2 to 3 years that we're going to be looking at some things. And I think that we can potentially address unforeseen circumstances with the entire financial assurance structure that we're creating, after a certain amount of time. So after giving it some thought, I wasn't really inclined to make a significant change like you're suggesting at this point. But I do acknowledge the inequity issues that I think had been brought up this weekend.
Commissioner Nanjiako?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the discussion. I also had some discussions and conversation about this, and I think that, I really appreciate as well the consideration of these unforeseen circumstances and these issues that we might have challenges with. And on that point, I agree with Commissioner Messner that, we can address those kinds of unique situations as, after another couple of years of sort of trying this on. On the other hand, I think of these that are up on the screen, I think I feel strongest about the second bullet of a transfer between operators in the options 3 and 4, where they're all going to be paying single well financial assurance. And given that the timelines differ, I wouldn't want wells that get transferred, for example, from an option 4 that are nearly fully funded to go into an option 3. And then when you look at the overall portfolio, then these wells are no longer at the same level of financial assurance because they're kind of, subsumed into the larger plan. I had a suggestion from one of the stakeholders I spoke to this weekend about when these transfers are occurring, there's correct me if I'm wrong, Director Murphy, but there's an itemization of the wells that are being transferred and the API numbers, et cetera. Could we not also include the total amount of financial assurance associated with those wells pre-transfer, and then have similar language to what Commissioner Gonzalez is proposing here, where the buying operator has to match that. So I think in general, I think that between the transfers between 3 and 4 are the ones that I feel it does make some sense to account for an equivalent amount, and perhaps even tie it, directly to those wells. I think that upon each annual review, because with the financial assurance plan, all operators are going to have to put forward kind of their well list, their status of all those wells. There's an opportunity as well to kind of update each well, either through an average or something else, whether they're covered in the blanket or whether they're, whether they're single well financially assured, and potentially track that. That's a little bit more of a meatier discussion that I don't know that we necessarily have to get into, and could be something to be considered in the future in terms of tracking, well by well. But again, I do think that there's merit to the second bullet here on the screen with respect to ensuring that the single well financial assurance that is built up by any operator within 3 or 4 gets transferred in an equal amount to this, sorry, did I say that the selling operator, whatever amount that they have accumulated would transfer over to the buying operator.
Director Murphy?
A couple of things. One, Bill, can I screen share? I think I've captured your suggestions. I've modified them ever so slightly to conform with, I think, how we write things. That said, if this idea goes forward, I'll want a lot of help from AAG Stafford and Davenport to incorporate it. So I have a slide up that has the language from 3 and then the added subparts that I think the commission is discussing right now. Given that, to me, there's been kind of a broad conversation that gets into a number of different nuances or hypotheticals, I would suggest considering adding this discussion of subparts into the SBP and adding language to the end of 3 that says, unless the commission directs otherwise. The rule provisions around transfers that you all have built contemplate both the buying and selling operator submitting a financial assurance plan to you prior to the transfer taking place. And I think if we're talking very specifically about a financial assurance plan in option 3 or 4 that doesn't conform to kind of exactly the timeline, it would give you all the opportunity to take a look at it and account for those unique situations. There are scenarios that it may not account for, and so I'm kind of trying to think that through in real time here, but that might be another way to approach this given the nuances. And sorry for adding another suggestion. And then the one kind of follow-up question I had for Commissioner Gonzalez on the second bullet point, if we want to stick with adding subparts, is the situation in which the selling operator has an approved financial assurance plan pursuant to 1, 2, 5, or 6, but the buying operator does not have an approved pre-transfer financial assurance plan, which to me kind of contemplates Commissioner McGowan's scenario. Might be something to either that you may want to think about, depending on what the ultimate direction is on these subparts.
Thoughts, anybody? Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I appreciate this conversation because I'm having a little deja vu from last week, where we start identifying all these little nuances of how these transfers could occur under what scenarios, 1 to 3 and 2 to 6 and whatever they look like. And I think we've tried to narrow it down here really to just try and have some protection specifically for low producing single well financially assured wells at transfer. I'm comfortable with the language, with the subparts. I think that there's probably even a couple that we haven't even accounted for in terms of thinking about other situations. And I do think we have a backstop in our rules already, right? Which is in the Form 9 process, where you're going to be putting up a new financial assurance plan. And if that financial assurance plan is materially impacted, and that's not a rule suggestion language, but generally materially impacted by the transfer, well, that can be part of your calculus, and you can account for it in your new proposed financial assurance plan and request approval of that prior or within a certain time frame of transfer, to ensure that you're able to meet the obligations of the rules while accepting the transfer. So I don't know that I have any more suggestions other than kind of what I've thrown out there. I think this is kind of the exhaustive extent that I've reached. So I don't know if the rest of the commission wants to pursue this and try and dial in this language, if we want to pick out parts and say this is good and the rest will be covered by the catch-all, or how we approach that. But I do think we have a catch-all built in there for instances that we don't account for or that may be missed through what we've considered thus far.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate this, Commissioner Gonzalez. I think I'm just going to reiterate, though, that I think that these concerns that you're bringing up are valid concerns, but I think that they're captured in kind of what we've got currently, and are captured through the review process that this commission and COG and the director have, both for transfers and for approval of option 3 and 4 financial assurance plans. And so while these are considerations that we should certainly consider as we review financial assurance plans for option 3 and 4 and review transfers and how to address that, I think we have the discretion in reviewing initial financial assurance plan. If it's a new operator 5 years from now and they're looking at a plan and they're starting their operations with a certain number of transferred wells that we require 20%, 30%, 50%. I think it depends, on the unique circumstances of that particular operator and the single well financial assurance plan that's being contemplated in either option 3 and 4. And so I think I would be comfortable just allowing the rules to work and allowing the commission to work under the guidelines and the kind of approach that we're taking to this. And I feel like we'll have the ability to capture all of this without having to go into the specificity, I think, of what you're trying to capture here, because I do think inevitably if we try to put specificity in there, we're going to miss things and potential important considerations that we need to review in these kind of instances. So I think that's just where I'm at right now.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps we should just take a straw poll. I like what Commissioner Gonzalez has put forward. I think it addresses then in the rule, instead of having to come to the commission, under what circumstances when a transfer happens to an option 3 or 4, how you could deal with it instead of having to have special things that constantly come in front of the commission. But I also understand, I feel like I'm perhaps in the minority here. So I suggest a straw vote.
Others with thoughts? Commissioner Gonzalez, can I ask a follow-up question? In the first sub bullet, is the buying operator always a 3-4?
Yes, Chair. What I'm considering here in terms of this specific sub-bullet, if we think about sub-bullet III under this rule, we created this specifically for an operator in options 3 or 4 receiving a transfer. The idea being that if an operator is in options 1, 2, 5, or 6, that if at 5 or 6, right, you're either under a comp bond and perhaps there's more information associated with it. If you're option 5, you need a new plan, almost essentially. And then with options 2, it's either going to roll up into your blanket bond or it's going to put you in options 3 or 4. So necessarily, I'm thinking about operators that have a specific full portfolio single well financial assurance option. Is what I thought was originally contemplated in this subpart 3. And as I'm trying to clean up and add a little more weight to with my suggested bullets.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. I think that is helpful for the slide. I would caution, so why don't we do a straw vote? Who is in favor? Give a thumbs up. And my thumb is based upon a cautious wiggly that the AAGs think through this during our break. But that is 4. So let's move with that in mind. Director Murphy, are you comfortable with the direction?
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Chair, I've got one more thing on my list, and then I will be done with the things that I identified in this last draft. And it's another sticky one, so I'll warn everyone now. May not have a super easy answer, but I'm going to propose what I think is where I think the way to go is in this regard. And it's regard to the idea of excluding injection wells from the low producing well definition under options 1 and 2, or really as it applies to options 1 and 2. And if you guys recall, last week I was of the opinion that that there shouldn't be an exclusion for that. And I was just thinking kind of generally about injection wells in general and making sure that we have the appropriate protection there. But at the same time, we moved from an inactive threshold to a low producing well threshold. And if we had stayed under the inactive threshold, necessarily the inactive definition excludes certain essentially active class 2 UIC wells. And I think that that's an appropriate exclusion. I think that if they're inactive UIC wells, that they would account towards the threshold. But I think that if we wanted to really keep the same intent of the wells that we were capturing, which was wells that produce very little, would receive single well financial assurance, my suggestion is that we exclude active class 2 UIC wells from the low producing well definition. And that's just because the definition is being used in a little bit different way than it was contemplated when defined. And I think this kind of reconciles a piece that may have gotten lost, right? When we pull one lever and something else happens over here. So I wanted to throw that up for discussion, see if anybody else had any thoughts about that. I had thought about maybe just incorporating all the exclusions from the inactive well definition, but I don't think that's appropriate. Really, I think the only appropriate ones that I would consider excluding are active class 2 UIC wells, and the other one is monitoring and observation wells. That's also defined under the inactive well definition of E3. Those are just wells that I don't think were ever contemplated to be part of an operator's portfolio for an above threshold single well financial assurance when we contemplated it under the inactive well threshold. So I think that helps reconcile where we were and where we got to and how we pulled these levers and really are going to get to the result that we're intending. So that's my idea on that. I know it's sticky, it's a little confusing, but I'm happy to answer any questions, at least on my thought process in that regard.
Commissioner Nanchapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Commissioner Gonzalez, for leading us through these different issues. So I thought about this one as well. Just a question, and then maybe I can comment a little bit on what you've proposed so far. With the exclusion of UIC wells from low producing wells, I think you said class 2 UICs, right? But are you talking about, and you're talking about the active ones specifically or the inactives?
I'm talking specifically about the active UIC wells. And that's with the intent that it comports to the same exclusion that these wells would be granted under if we had talked about an inactive well. So essentially, if you look at the inactive well definition, active Class 2 UIC wells are excluded from the inactive well definition. So they would have otherwise been excluded from an inactive well threshold in counting towards that under an operator's option 1 or option 2 blanket bond.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So my thought was somewhat similar. I thought that for the per well average production threshold, that the active Class 2 UIC wells should be excluded, just simply to determine what the production threshold is, since obviously a well that's receiving water is not a producing well. However, for the well count for a blanket bond, they would be included, and only the inactive ones would be included in the excess low producing calculation. I don't know if I just said basically the same thing that you were trying to say, but I just wanted to make sure that that was, I was a little bit, I maybe got lost a little bit in some of the bits and pieces you were saying, but is that essentially the same as what you're proposing?
Yeah, I believe so, Commissioner Nanjapa, and I am obviously not a wordsmith. I'm more of a semi-coherent rambler. So I think that you have gotten to the same space as I am.
I would say you're a much more effective wordsmith than I am, but I see Director Murphy.
Director Murphy?
I want to check in. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I think I understand the point of excluding a UIC well that is not an inactive well, and sorry for the double negative definition, but that's more, I don't want to define it as an active well because that has different connotations. And the exclusion of a monitoring or observing well from the definition of low producing, ergo, those two categories of wells would be excluded from any regulatory application associated with a low producing well as it relates to financial assurance. I think I have that encapsulated. The other piece that I'm less clear on what your position is or what you're proposing, Commissioner Gonzalez and Commissioner Nanjapa, is how these wells are or are not treated for purposes of calculating production, the daily production threshold. And so I'm going to flip down to slide 9 because I think that this is something that we did discuss a week ago. And I want to make sure that that's what we're revisiting right now as well. Okay. I'd love your clarification, Commissioner Nanjapa.
Commissioner Nanjapa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Murphy. So for me, it would be that I'm just going to keep saying active UIC wells just for the purposes of my brain, not stumbling through double negatives. But so for the per well average, we would exclude those. And I would agree with the additional suggestion from Commissioner Gonzalez of excluding the monitoring wells in the per well production threshold calculation. However, I would say that all of the UIC wells would be included with respect to the well count for the blanket bond, as well as, so they would all be counted for the well count for the blanket bond, and the inactive UIC wells would be included in the excess low producing calculation. So I think that last part, I think you were saying that you would exclude them from the low producing calculation. I'm saying they should be included.
Commissioner Nanjapa?
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Thank you. Commissioner Nanjapa, are you suggesting that they are included for the purposes of single well financial assurance, or they're included for the purposes of, it sounds like they're excluded for the purposes of the production levels. It sounds like they are included for calculating in the blanket bond, which I don't quite understand how that calculation would even play in, because the blanket bond, right, unless you're talking about on the per well basis. for the
Yes.
blanket bond?
So like if you're counting,
Yes.
if you've got 0 to 50 or 50 and, et cetera, like that.
Yeah. So basically we're saying that this is a well that's not a low producing well that doesn't get over threshold at excess bonding, but is a well that will fall into the blanket bond amounts.
Right.
Okay. I am.
Those are the active ones, but then the inactive ones would be part of the total low producing calculation, and whether or not, whatever excess would be inclusive of that, those inactive wells in that count. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
Commissioner Messmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to say it again so that I make sure I understand it. And so class 2 injection wells are, irregardless of whether they're active or inactive, are not counted towards production levels in an operator's portfolio, period. 2, all class 2 injection wells are included in an operator's total overall well count and associated financial assurance with that. And inactive class 2 injection wells are considered low producing wells and should have single well financial assurance associated with them within whatever allowances are allowed in whatever option structure that operator happens to be in. Is that right? Okay.
Letting Director Murphy catch up. All right, Commissioner Najaba, and then Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you. I think maybe this is already understood in what you've written, but just to be very clear, that last bullet of the inactive UIC wells would be included in any low producing well counts, as well as any associated single well financial assurance requirements. And I'm saying that because obviously in options 1 and 2, the number of low producing wells would impact, the percentage that gets covered in the blanket versus the single well financial. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just wondering, in that last bullet that we just created, also subject to the low producing single well financial research requirements for options 1, 2, 5, and 6, because I think we just finished talking about how 5 will have some sort of production limit, but we don't know what it'll be individualized for each applicant.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yeah, I appreciate that suggestion, Commissioner McGowan, and I think that is fine. Without knowing what option 5s are going to look like, I might just add the language as applicable to just kind of make sure that we're including it appropriately.
Okay. Director Murphy?
Thanks, Chair. Taking us back to the first 2 bullet points that are in the black italicized font, I've heard different things about whether it's all UIC wells or those UIC wells that are not inactive. And to use the phrase we've been using, is it active UIC wells or all UIC wells that are either excluded or included, depending on which bullet point?
Commissioner Gonzalez, then Commissioner Messner.
Sure, and I'll just share my intent with that, Director Murphy, and it's basically that UIC wells that are not inactive is the limitation there. I think that if you have an inactive UIC well, that either needs to be plugged and off the books, or it's got to get the appropriate financial assurance, and really you're not going to get the benefit of that exclusion under a blanket bond threshold amount. And so that kind of is how I was reconciling my thoughts from last week to this week, because I was, in the camp where we didn't need to make this exclusion, but I think that this exclusion with the appropriate precision, as we're attempting to do here, gets to the right spot. Did that answer your question, from my perspective at least?
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I could be fine with that. I guess I was thinking about it a little differently. I understand that bullets 2 and 3, so bullet 2, including UIC wells that are not inactive, and monitoring and observing wells when calculating the blanket bond, covers the financial assurance for those, and then the inactive UIC wells in the third bullet cover the financial assurance for those. The question in the first bullet is whether or not UIC wells should be considered in production thresholds. UIC wells don't produce, and so I guess I would argue that they just don't need to be considered in production thresholds. But if you think that including them inactive in there, or including inactive injection wells should be included in bullet 1 to incentivize them to plug and abandon them if they're not using them, then I'm fine with that too.
Any final thoughts? All right, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Chair, I have nothing left on my list. I take it you're asking me if we're moving on, or are you asking me for my feedback on here? Because I think I've given it.
Yeah, moving on.
No, I've got nothing else on my list.
Okay. It is now noon. I guess we could take a break. We could keep plowing through. What's the pleasure of the board and or the director? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that Commissioner Gonzalez has covered many of the things that I had on my list as well. I think I only have 2 more items that I just wanted to clarify and or talk through. So if each commissioner just has 1 or 2 things, I vote we plow through and then break.
Then you've got the floor. Go with your 1 or 2 items.
Okay. Director Murphy, can you clarify for me whether or not an operator is allowed to transfer a completed OGDP or Form 2A, et cetera, as part of the transferring from one operator to another, and whether or not that needs to be explicit in our language or if it's understood, et cetera? Sorry, I may have missed that you've already talked about it.
I think it came up, and I think I've had offline conversations about it when the issue was raised to me about 10 days ago. I checked with staff, and I think that there's a different path to deal with it than regulatory language for 2 reasons. One, I think we have a comprehensive list of transferable items that are, to be very imprecise, things like actual things that can move and exist within our system. An OGDP that has passed completeness has undergone substantial staff review. The operator, the selling operator will have invested a significant amount of time and resources in it, and we don't want to lose that work product. At the same time, it's not clear to me that every time a transfer occurs that the OGDP will necessarily go with it. And so I would prefer to either add SBP language or provide guidance to operators who are pursuing a transfer through staff's guidance process, that if there's a transfer occurring and work product has gone into an OGDP that is past completeness, staff will work with the operator to change the name of the submitting operator to conform to the transfer. In our experience, often with transfers, there need to be other changes made to the proposal as well. And so I think it's easier to preserve that flexibility through those existing processes instead of codifying it in rule. But I understand the concern and happy to talk more about it if you would like.
I think if we can take care of this through guidance and working with operators, that's fine, if other commissioners are okay. And my last one was, I guess I would like some clarification about Form 9 intents and whether or not they're confidential and whether or not they should be, and I would welcome Director Murphy's input.
Can I pull, sorry, apparently my brain's slowing down way too rapidly at this point in the day. Can we pull Mr. Ellis back and have him talk about the process for Form 9s and how they're coming in and how they're going out? And hopefully he's still listening in. I actually didn't check with him.
I apologize. You caught me off guard, Director Murphy. I just came back from another meeting. Could you?
Let's let Commissioner McGowan re-ask her question for you, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Mr. Ellis. I have some operators wondering if the Form 9 intent was confidential and concerns that it might not be. And it involves some business dealings that perhaps are not quite complete by the time we get the form, that they would prefer to stay confidential until the deal is done. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Form 9 transfer intents are dealt with and whether or not we need extra confidentiality around that.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. I do appreciate the question. So our current rules allow for the Form 9 intent to be marked as confidential, and they remain confidential until the business transaction has transpired. So once the actual deal has closed, then they're no longer confidential at that point. But we do treat them as confidential if the operator marks that they need to be treated as confidential. So there is a checkbox on the form that allows for that.
Thank you. I think that takes care of any concern I might have.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Those were on my list as well. Glad we got through those. Are there other issues from commissioners? Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have two somewhat smallish items and then one sort of item for SBP if commissioners agree. So I'll start kind of at the top with transfers. As I was kind of talking about when we were discussing the bullets that Commissioner Gonzalez brought up with respect to options 3 and 4 and single well financial assurance. I've been thinking in general that we have these situations that are very clear in option 3 or 4 operators where they're going to have single well financial assurance that's being built up over time. And I'm wondering if, at least in the SBP, we could have some consideration of tracking that amount over time, such that if an operator in options 3 and 4 transfers wells to an operator anywhere else, all of those wells and those API numbers should have an amount associated with it that could be more clearly sort of tracked, and that would also sort of help the operators themselves to be able to determine what amounts have already been accumulated. So I'll throw that out as a first, just to, like I said, maybe more of an SBP consideration for sort of future tracking.
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question to staff would be, how were they planning on kind of tracking wells that go from one operator to a next, and making sure that the appropriate amount of financial assurance follows the well, so to speak? Because for some, it will change, right? Because it will just fit into the portfolio, and it might end up with a different amount depending on which option is getting transferred to which option. Sorry, I hope I'm understanding what you were asking for, Commissioner Najap, and if I could understand how we're planning on doing that in the first place. It all sounds very complicated.
I'd recognize Commissioner Gonzalez before turning to Director Murphy.
Yeah, and I appreciate the thought, Commissioner Najap. This kind of goes to one of these things we've gone back to a number of times in these deliberations is, are we talking about, these single well accounts that go with the well, or are we talking about the amount, the total single well financial assurance amount being a factor in like a calculation variable, right, to get to that overall amount? And I think that's the way I've landed. I think it's the way our rules look and the way they execute well. I think it'd be really hard to separate that out and say, this well had X amount of financial assurance with this operator, now it has X amount of financial assurance with this operator, and then it's got X amount of financial assurance with that operator. Because really, it's just, this operator has 25 wells and their single well financial assurance is that number times whatever it is based on depth equals that amount, and then it goes on and on to the subsequent operators. So I just think that we're looking at aggregate amounts of single well financial assurance based on number of wells, as opposed to the well itself having a financial assurance that stays with it throughout its life. And so I have a hard time thinking about how we'd be able to execute on your idea under that thought process, right? That kind of framework.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. I think I'll line up with you on that thought. Director Murphy, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. To answer Commissioner McGowan's question about how we were planning on tracking it, I think it is more at the operator level versus the individual well in terms of looking at the total well portfolio. I mean, it would probably be possible to do a hindsight look back at an individual well as it had moved through different stages of transfers or not. But I don't think it was, I don't think we were contemplating designing a system that would account for, well, 1, 2, 3, 4 had $6 in 2023 and $2 in 2024 and $17 in 2025. I presume that's a feasible thing to do, but it isn't how I think we've approached it or how I've been thinking through with Ms. Danzig how to implement the rules as drafted to date.
Najapa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I appreciate that. I was trying to just think through. I recognize that it would be a difficult thing, but I think everything that commissioners have voiced makes sense. So I'm good with that one. The next one is Rule 223 with respect to the demonstrated costs being confidential. And I understand, and I know Director Murphy, you and I talked a little bit about this offline, but as I'm thinking about this with respect to what we discussed as putting in the SBP for tracking demonstrated costs in the future, I just wanted to, I thought maybe there could be some clarification in the confidentiality provision in Rule 223 that, the details of demonstrated costs, could be considered confidential in terms of providing that to the commission for, whether it was, I think Commissioner Gonzalez had given examples of like invoices or, contract agreements or things like that might occur. However, I think if if we could clarify that the sort of final total amount, at least at minimum for the plugging of the well itself, that would not be considered a confidential, like the demonstrated final amount or the demonstrated final cost, as just a number by itself, sort of anonymized, would not be considered confidential, and therefore would be something that we could, report on later, as we were talking about that sort of, reporting and looking at overall costs. So anyway, that was just something that I felt like in talking about the confidentiality of the demonstrated costs, that it maybe wasn't clear that we still could publicly share demonstrated costs that were anonymized. Does that make sense? And I just wondered if we could have SBP language on that.
Commissioner Messmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I just have a question. I appreciate that some of the details we had talked about having the ability to be confidential, but this commission is going to be determining whether or not the demonstrated cost should be applied. Well, the director or the commission, depending on the scenario, and in turn are going to create a financial assurance plan utilizing that demonstrated cost. So, there is going to be some transparency as far as what the overall cost is regarding that demonstrated cost. And so I guess that's the question. Does there need to be additional language? I think that's part of the financial assurance plan, is whatever that demonstrated cost ultimately is that, or unless I'm misunderstanding.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Joppa, maybe can you clarify how you think I'm a proponent of data and data collection and using it to figure out if the rules are working and et cetera. So do we envision using the demonstrated costs to determine, so back to, figuring out whether our single well financial assurances are appropriately set?
Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan, for the question. And I agree, just to go back to what Commissioner Messner said, that, there's going to be some transparency in that final amount of the demonstrated cost. But I guess, and a stakeholder had raised this with me as well, that, with the way this language is written here, is that a demonstration of costs for the single well financial assurance is considered confidential information as it's written here, that there was a concern that maybe then that information would not be able to be shared, as I said, in an anonymized fashion. And so I'm just talking about SBP language, just to kind of clarify that does not preclude a final amount from being shared, publicly for the purposes of reporting or reevaluating single well financial assurance in the future. Does that make more sense?
Commissioner Gonzalez.
I think that last part that you just said, Commissioner Najapa, makes a lot of sense. I want to reiterate that in 223B, right, where these subparts are included, it says confidential information may include. Really, 223 is pretty broad, right? I think an operator can pretty much designate anything they want as confidential, and it goes up to the staff, and then maybe upon appeal to the commission to determine whether or not that truly is confidential. It's not a certainty from any one of those two perspectives. And so I think that this was a request to recognize the confidential nature of many components of demonstrated costs, but I don't think it excludes what you're asking for just by virtue of its language in the rule, the way that I read it. And I think that there could be some important SPP language that could be added that is specific to a final amount that's used for tracking and really, future rulemaking. I don't know if that's the right thing, but really tracking and a greater understanding of the efficacy of the amounts that we've created through our rules, something like that. But I'm not opposed to what you're asking for, and I think that just by virtue of it being in Rule 223 doesn't necessarily say or make it confidential.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate that again. I appreciate your honing in on the precision of the language in the may there, which that's a good point. But yeah, no, I think, really, I just wanted a little bit of treatment that it doesn't preclude, the ability for the commission to look at final amounts and share them publicly for the purposes of reevaluating single well financial assurance in the future. Which I think, yeah, okay. And I think what you have there is good. Yeah.
I would add one thing, Chair and Commissioner Nanjapa, just for consideration is, and I want to make sure I could say it before I don't lose it because it's on the tip of my tongue now, is for non-operator specific information. So we're not calling out specific operators. I think that would also help we get the information. We're not affecting anyone's, ability to conduct a business as it may have some sensitivities around this information.
Yeah, that's the anonymized, as I was sort of using that phrase, but I exactly what you just said.
All right, are we comfortable here?
I have one last thing, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
This, we did discuss, I think I maybe raised it, or maybe more than one of us did, as we were deliberating last week, but I did hear from an operator that had some concerns about overall total financial assurance amounts. And so as we were talking through it, we were discussing potential caps. But I also recognize that we have option 5 as a way to address this. And so I guess I am, in talking with this operator, there was discussion of perhaps at least capping option 1 and option 2 and considering amounts greater than the comprehensive bond, because there's sort of a, certain bars that in terms of production that need to be achieved to get into the comprehensive bond. So option 1, perhaps considering a total cap of 50 million and a total cap of 65 million in option 2. That said, again, I'm acknowledging that we have option 5 already on the table. And so I just wanted to see if other commissioners had also maybe talked to folks and thought about this and considered one versus the other.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm adamantly opposed to caps. And I think that we've addressed, we've talked about this, we've addressed this, we've developed option 6, we've developed option 5. We've developed production thresholds after months and months of stakeholder work with all kinds of different stakeholders. The development of a cap at this point is just not a consideration for me. So that's where I stand on that.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair. So on the front end of that, I'm in a different position than Commissioner Mester in that I am a proponent of caps, and I proposed them in our deliberations last week. That being said, and I have no opposition to the caps as proposed by Commissioner Nanjapa from a content perspective, but I do want to honor the deliberations that we went through last week. And I think we talked about things pretty heavily and got into some details, and I was outvoted in that regard, and that's fine. That's how these deliberations work. And so I'm going to kind of stick to my position that I think that we have a good framework, and I don't know that I've heard enough information about caps one way or another to reopen that door. So as one commissioner, I'm comfortable where we stand. I am a proponent of caps. I thought they were a good idea to begin with. I think it's fine addition now if there are other commissioners that were interested in that, and I will, lend my support. But in general, I think what we're doing here is working, and I feel like that's a settled matter in my mind.
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'm aligned with Commissioner Gonzalez and his comments. And I think also the conversation we just had about option 5 and making that language not so, changing preventive to, I think, better language that explains exactly what we're trying to get to would hopefully also address an operator who thought that the amount in option 1 or option 2 was prohibitive or unreasonable and unnecessary.
I'm in agreement with you, Commissioner McGowan. I think that option 5 solution was elegant, and I think it will be available if we get to a spot with option 1 and 2 becoming unreasonable or unnecessary. Okay, as Director mentioned, if we can count to 3, we could be done. So I've counted to 3 here on this thought. Commissioner Anjapa, you said that was your last issue. Does anybody else have any issues? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And not an issue, but just in talking with AAG Davenport this weekend, if I'm understanding correctly, I was pushing pretty heavily to get actual data about plugging and abandonment from operators from their particular wells. And it looks like that's not going to work under this series of rules that we've been talking about. It was suggested to me to try again for maybe a working group. And after talking to some stakeholders, I'm not sure there's a lot of appetite for a working group. And what was pointed out to me, what's important is how much it costs the commission to P&A a well, and we will be getting that data through the Orphan Well Fund. We have quite a list that we're going to be working off of and more funding to accomplish that. So for now I'm good collecting the data from the Orphan Well Fund list and using that data to make sure that, kind of the smell test about whether or not we have acceptable levels of single well financial assurance works. If at some point we discover that that data feels insufficient, then I might want to revisit a working group where we talk to operators about the collection of their data and how much it costs them to P&A their wells.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Commissioner McGowan. Any final issues, thoughts, deliberations? All right, I'm not seeing any. I think that under the protocol that we developed this morning, we should now take a break and allow Director Murphy and AAG Stafford and others to encapsulate this direction into the final. I'm probably thinking that is something that might take a couple of hours. I'm looking to Director Murphy for some thoughts on that.
Chair, that's my estimate as well. I think most of the changes are pretty straightforward. A couple of the changes on transfers and the inclusion and exclusion of non-inactive or active UAC wells might take a little bit more drafting time. Could we tentatively say that we'll come back at 2:30 if everybody's okay with that? And if we get close to 2 o'clock and I'm worried we're not going to make that 2:30 cutoff, we can.
Do you want to just say 3 o'clock, Director Murphy, just to err on the side of giving you more time? I don't believe we've got a lot of deliberations left in us. I think it's really just a matter of giving you time to get this right?
Sure.
Okay, let's then all agree that we will break until 3 p.m. Okay, I believe we've got the recording back in progress. Again, this is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We are taking up the financial assurances rulemaking, docket 2106-00097. We deliberated this morning. We gave staff and director a chance to establish a final draft for our consideration. And I believe we will hear from Director Murphy and Attorney General Stafford. The floor is y'all's.
Great. Well, thank you, commissioners, for the final thoughts and some time and space to get them integrated. I'm going to turn it over to AAG Stafford, who has been tireless for the last 8 to 10 months working through all these different revisions, and let her walk through kind of the final changes. Our plan right now, we have no confusing PowerPoint presentations for me, so that should be a relief to everybody with 42 different, colors of text on them, trying to track all the moving parts. Instead, what we're going to do is walk through from top to bottom the revisions based on today's conversations, articulate them. I think there's a couple of places where we want to talk to you briefly about them. And with that, AG Stafford, do you want to call up the rules and get us kicked off?
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. For the record, this is Assistant Attorney General Caitlin Stafford. I will be walking through staff's rule revisions as presented to us by you all earlier today. So as we can see, we're starting just from the top here, and I will walk through the changes we've made. I have the changes in track changes so that you can clearly see where edits have been made. And please excuse me if I make any of you all motion sick with my scrolling. I apologize in advance. So this morning, the commissioners, you all deliberated on some language surrounding an addition to the definition of low producing well. Now, as you'll see on the screen, staff has added 2 clarifications to the low producing well definition to call out the class 2 UIC wells that are not inactive wells. Those are considered, a low producing well does not mean a class 2 UIC well that is not an inactive well. And then furthermore, a low producing well also does not mean a well used for the purpose of monitoring or observing an oil or gas reservoir. Now you'll notice there is some additional language there calling out stratigraphic wells. Staff thought this was appropriate based on the inclusion of stratigraphic wells in the definition of inactive wells. We wanted to ensure, for consistency's sake, that this was also reproduced in this definition. And this is a point where, we would welcome any additional interpretations by you all if this is appropriate. I will continue on, but I will pause to let you consider the language before you.
AG Stafford, just from a going forward perspective, you're familiar with the draft. We know the direction we gave you. Is it better to stop each time, or is it better just to sort of run through everything and see the holistic approach? And I'm just going to completely defer to whatever you think is best.
Certainly, Chair Robbins. I think for this particular change, I at least wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we had included some additional information. So I'm happy to proceed whichever way the commissioners would prefer. I at least wanted to give you the opportunity to jump in if this was not an appropriate inclusion on our part.
Chair, I vote for questions as we go.
Okay.
We've all been
Everybody
going
good?
at this a long time.
Everybody good with this? All right, you got thumbs up.
Wonderful, thank you. I will move forward then. So the next direction we received from you all this morning related to the inclusion of some clarifying language in the single wall financial assurance definition, which you can see here. I would also note that I've taken off the page numbers here, so just so that we can all sort of see the rules as one sort of flowing document. So again, we have the single well financial assurance definition. This is subpart C, subsection 3. The inclusion of vertical when we're talking about total vertical depth for the single well plugging and abandonment cost calculations. That was a simple one, so I'll continue forward. Staff made additional changes we are now in Rule 218, 218B5A. So this was the discussion of the, you'll recall that 218B discusses the Form 9 intent that a selling operator provides when an item will be transferred. So we're discussing here, I believe this was Commissioner Gonzalez's inclusion of specific language related to how single well financial assurance will be contributed over time based upon the selling operators and buying operators approved financial assurance plans at that point in time. You'll also notice there was a small typographical error made up in subsection 3, so that has been corrected as well. I'll pause it here, and if anybody has any questions, I would note that this language we reproduced from what you saw this morning, aside from this callback here to pursuant to Rule 218E, but this language should largely track with what you all directed this morning.
Everybody good? I like this. Keep going, AG Stafford.
Thank you. And I will say I can't see thumbs up from everybody, just the way that my screen is oriented. So I might pause for a bit just because I can't see that. Again, another typographical error here. This initial was changed to intent to reflect the correct name of the form. Consistent with changes that were discussed this morning, I'm in Rule 434D3F. This is the discussion of the aim language that was referenced with respect to AQCC regulation number 7. This again was a clarification related to the detection of the leak that was included on an operator's delayed repair list. I will note that this, just in case it's unclear the way that the red lines appear to you all, the introductory sentence now reads, whether the operator has detected a leak that was included on the operator's delayed repair list in accordance with AQCC regulation number 7, and the appropriate incorporation by reference language is included below here. That brings me to a change, a bit of a corresponding change. I believe this is 434D7E. Again, ensuring that this particular rule provision mirrors the language that was included above regarding AQCC regulation number 7 and the delayed repair list. If there are no questions here, I'll keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
I do not believe there were any directed changes to the 500 series, so I will continue into Rule 702. So this is the discussion of financial assurance for plugging, abandonment, and reclamation. And in 702C, this change here was made to clarify what types of wells are, or excuse me, the average daily per well production, what types of wells should be taken into consideration when that production is calculated. And consistent with the direction that we received this morning, we have inserted a sentence here to set forth that the operator will not include the Class 2 UIC wells that are not inactive wells, wells used for the purpose of monitoring or observing an oil and gas reservoir, and stratigraphic wells. This language should mirror the language I opened with you all earlier with respect to some of the language that was included in the low producing well definition. I would like to clarify that. So I believe on slide 9 this morning, this was the first bullet, and this has been addressed here in Rule 702C. Based upon our understanding of this particular language, as well as the inclusion of the new language in the low producing well definition, it's staff's position that the second and third bullet, we believe, are unnecessary to incorporate, as the current rule language does capture the intent set forth in those particular bullets. But again, I'll open that up to your consideration if you would like to discuss that further, or if Director Murphy has any other clarification she'd like to make on that point.
Commissioner Messner? Hold on just a sec. Okay,
Sure.
Ms. Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, I'd like just clarity on how current rules capture that and where.
Sure. So the way that we have interpreted at least the direction this morning, and I'm going to scroll past a couple of changes here. So when we're talking about 702C, and then the first bullet point with respect to excluding the UIC wells, when you get down to the 702D language specific to the blanket bonding amounts, there is the language there that calls out, the exclusion of out of service wells. And under our interpretation, we believe that that means that everything else is therefore included in that count. And if I'm misstating that, Director Murphy, please feel free to correct me. But that's sort of where we were coming from there. So sort of understanding how those different pieces intertwine, we didn't feel that it was necessary to include additional, potentially repetitive language.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, roll on.
And I will back up so that I don't miss anything here. Thank you. And now the language I'm in 702C5. Again, apologies for the scrolling. Now, the language that you see before you relates to the discussion earlier about the standard under which option 5 plans will be reviewed. Instead of phrasing this in the negative and saying unnecessary and unreasonable, we felt it was more appropriate to phrase it in the way that we have it presented before you. So it reads, an operator may only submit a financial assurance plan that meets the criteria of Rule 702D5 if it is necessary and reasonable for the operator to submit financial assurance in amounts different than those specified in Rules 702D1 through 4, or for other exceptional or unique circumstances. And you'll see we've removed the unique, as I believe was directed this morning. And I just wanted to call your attention to the rephrasing that became necessary because of the way that we felt was most appropriate to phrase the changes here to capture the necessary and reasonable language.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, AG Stafford, for walking us through this. It wasn't necessarily that we were talking about the necessariness or the, I guess, necessity and reasonableness of an operator's submitting a financial assurance plan, different amounts. It was really being limited by unnecessary and unreasonable amounts that are driven by the proposed, or that are potentially driven by the proposed existing framework. And so I don't know if this captures what we were thinking, but I want to flag that and see what other commissioners think in regard to this language.
I tend to agree with you, Commissioner Gonzalez. Thank you for making that point. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. I would agree. I don't love the language as it's written right now. Reading it this way, it makes me want to go back to the prohibit language that Commissioner Gonzalez had initially suggested. And so, but I mean, if we could rewrite it, I think capturing what Commissioner Gonzalez had just talked about, I think I can be okay with this, but this isn't where my head was as far as intent.
Thank you, commissioners. We will endeavor to fix that very shortly.
I think what commissioners are saying is that due to exceptional circumstances or where potential use of the alternate option establishes financial assurance plan that is unreasonable and or unnecessary, or something like that. Commissioner McGowan, did you have your hand raised? This was your elegant ideas to begin with. So
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the conversation, and I saw Commissioner Gonzalez still had a look on his face. So I want to make sure that the way we wordsmith this is clear. You went through the other options first, and the outcome was unnecessary or unreasonable for the circumstances that your financial and the health of your wells, or you have an exceptional circumstance. And so I just want to make sure we're all going to be okay with the end result, because if not, then to Commissioner Messner's point, maybe we go back to the prohibitive language.
I think this can be massaged in a way that we can get to the language that we're looking for. And I have all the confidence in the world in the AAGs that are working on this right now as we speak, I bet, while Ms. Stafford runs through the rest of the stack. Director Murphy?
I think that's exactly right, Chair. I think we can put just a little pin in this, continue to roll through, make sure we've captured all the changes, and maybe break for 2 minutes and come back to this.
Great.
Okay, I will move down. So I'm in 702D now, and we've received direction this morning with respect to the language around the submittal of the financial assurance amounts. So I believe this is 702D1B. So you'll see in this change was carried through to 702D2B and also D5B and I believe D6B, and I will scroll down to confirm that for you. But again, this was the language to say that, you know, the commission would like to see the financial assurance amount as soon as possible, but no later than 90 days from the commission's approval of the financial assurance plan. And I think this should capture the intent from this morning's discussions. I will continue forward. Again, this is another change that was carried through and would be very similar. The same language is you will see in the associated provisions and the different options set forth here. But this is the discussion of the certification of financial capability. As you can see, we included signed by a corporate officer and struck the second part of the sentence. This language exists for the options 1 through 4 and 6 plans. We kept the option 5 plan language the same, as I believe we were directed to do.
Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a stupid question, but do we need to specify that the operator's corporate officer, or is that just assumed? I kind of read it as any corporate officer can sign it, but I leave it to the lawyers to decide how best to capture that, right?
Chair Robbins?
Yes, go ahead.
If I may, I take your point, Commissioner Messner, and with Director Murphy's blessing, I'm happy to include the operator's corporate officer.
And there may be more than one corporate officer. I'm not sure if that's the case, but you might, it could maybe even say like by the appropriate corporate, I don't know. Maybe we're nickel and diming this thing now.
Thank you all. I'll flag that and I'll go back and change that as we continue forward here. This again is a similar language from above that I spoke to you about with respect to the submission of the financial assurance amounts. Again, financial capability, there might be some repetitive changes you see here, which will be reflected, of course. I will reflect your final decision on those. And now we're in 702 D5. This is the discussion of the option 5 plans. And it, based on this morning's discussion, staff understood that there should be consideration of the amount or the calculation that an operator would make if they were looking to, or if they had to submit financial assurance in the amount specified in 702 D1 through 4, but we're instead pursuing an option 5 plan. So we included some additional informational language here to say that the calculation of financial assurance that would be required for the operator's low producing wells, if the operator pursued a financial assurance plan based on its average daily per well production, this information should be included as part of their option 5 submittal so that the commission could consider that for a potential approval of an option 5 plan.
And this will show you how difficult my mind is working these days, but I can't remember from our deliberations this morning. I know I had thought about it, and so this is maybe just me, is that this sort of language would be in the SBP. Now it's in the rule. Was there a conscious decision on that part, or was I the only one thinking about that, or what? Director Murphy?
Yeah, Chair, if it'd be helpful, I can bring the slide up. I think that my recollection of the conversations that we were going a pretty long way towards just SBP language, and then kind of towards the end, we brought the idea back that it ought to be in rule, and I'm happy to pull that slide up real quick.
I don't think you need to pull the slide up. I'm just looking at my fellow commissioners to make sure we've got consensus that this is the appropriate landing spot. Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think this is a good way of capturing it in the rules, and then also in the SBP, I think there was consideration of language that an operator would assume or will consider, how they're going to address low producing wells based on where they would land based according to their production metrics. So I think it does both, right? And so I think this is a good thing because this gives us the information necessary to determine it, and then the SBP language, asks them to ask them how they're going to actually address it. This is just a calculation. So
Everybody else good with that? Okay, roll on.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Now moving down a little bit further, there was a discussion this morning about language in 702B or 702, excuse me, D5B numerat 3. And this was the discussion related to clarifying the wells that were being discussed under this transferred wells provision. So we have included the low producing call out here. And I think this reflects where the discussion landed this morning. I'll
Roll on.
continue on. Again, another change that is, or another couple of changes that are very similar to the changes that we've discussed already related to those similar rule provisions. I'm sorry again for the scrolling. I'm bringing you to Rule 705, and this is the discussion of 705B related to seismic operations, and where I believe the direction we were given this morning was to strike the phrase seismic operations and include instead seismicity from oil or gas wells, with also this final sentence here being stricken from the, I guess, current proposed rule draft.
Everybody good? Looks good. Hey, AG Stafford.
Thank you very much. And I believe that is it for me. Those were the extent of the changes that we dealt with during the break. And I now have the additional edits to capture y'all's intent now.
So before we give you 5 minutes or so to do that, looking around the room to seeing if anybody has anything further. Commissioner Messner.
thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry to be a pain, but I'm trying to just make sure that a couple of things are captured here. So so on the last transferred well, low producing well piece that you had talked about there, I mean, well, I acknowledge that what you have up there may capture it, because it does have the 218G, I think it's 218G associated with it. I think my suggestion was to grab the transfer of low producing wells language from option 1 or 2 plans as presented in there, which states that single well financial assurance for any low producing well that exceeds the threshold set forth in the rule associated with option 5 and was subject to a transfer of operatorship approved by the director pursuant to Rule 18G. And the reason for that is that there's different thresholds that would be allowed that would create an allowance for low producing wells. And I think we want to just make sure that that allowance is captured in that piece, because it almost reads right now that it would require single well financial assurance for all low producing wells, which could be true if it was an option 3 or 4 operator utilizing an option 5, but not necessarily an option 1 or 2 operator utilizing option 5. Does that make sense?
AG Stafford.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Yes, Commissioner Mesner, that makes sense. Thank you.
And then the other transfer question, and I wonder if you could pull up that language, but it was the initial transfer language associated with transfers for option 3 or 4 buyers. And so the selling operator has an approved financial assurance plan. I mean, do you read this as that the buying operator in these 2 provisions is only an option 3 or 4 buying operator? I mean, is that clear? In the first provision? Well, I guess the first or the second provision.
Sorry.
Go ahead, AG Stafford. Sorry, I was muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Robbins. I do believe that that is the intent of those particular provisions. And I think that is captured, or at least my reading of this language here captures that intent. But if there is a disagreement there, I understand.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the questioning, Commissioner Messner. These are sub bullets to this sub bullet Roman numerat 3, and Roman numerat 3 applies only to 702 D 3 and 4, which is basically options 3 and 4. So that's why I was proposing this language go in here, because I think that it's already captured that in this section we're talking about options 3 and 4 operators as the buying operator, or as the operator that's receiving the wells in the transaction, perhaps. And if you and I guess that sentence starts off as buying operator, so it is identified all the way through. That's my interpretation and kind of why I was proposing that this language be added to this particular provision.
Yeah. I'm good.
Follow-up, Commissioner Messmer.
Nope, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're at that spot where we are seeing if there's any further direction, questions, thoughts. I think we are going to give staff 10 minutes to make final conforming edits. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have nothing more to add. I just want to recognize all the hard work that's gone into this rulemaking, all the folks who participated and shared their thoughts and their expertise and their ideas, and when asked to think outside the box, provided things that were outside the box. And to my fellow commissioners, because they're super smart and helped me see things that I didn't think of before. And to the staff who's been working their butts off, putting together all of this crazy language that we keep putting forward and trying to interpret what we really mean. And I get that you guys want to go work on a little bit more language, but for me, this is a good way for me just to sum things up and say, I think these rules are robust. I think they have reduced the risk to the state. I think when you layer on all of these pieces that we've been working on, you end up with a pretty comprehensive package that gets at the financial health of an operator and the health of the portfolio of wells that they have. And I'm pretty impressed with the work that's happened over the last couple of months. And I'm just really appreciative of everything that everyone's contributed. So just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, Director Murphy, how much time do you want?
I trust that we could probably do it in 5, but if everybody wants to like walk around the block for 10.
Yeah, let's return at 3:45, and I literally will take you up and walk around the block.
Great. See you all soon.
3:45. Okay, welcome back. We've got the recording going again. We are looking to hear from Director Murphy and AAG Stafford.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Again, this is AAG Caitlin Stafford. What I have up for you on the screen now is this goes back to this is Rule 702C5. This is the criteria for the financial assurance plans, specifically related to option 5. And this should reflect the change back to the language regarding unnecessary or unreasonable for the operator to submit amounts specified in 702D1 through 4. So I will stop now, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Are folks good with this revised reverse approach? Seeing thumbs up and shaking of heads in an affirmative fashion. Great work.
Thank you all. I'll scroll down now. This is back to the certification of financial capability. I included Commissioner Mesner's clarification by an operator's, excuse me, I'll add operator's corporate officer. And that change is should be reflected in each one of these, which I will, I guess that was the only one I missed in, hopefully. So again, carrying through to specify that it is an operator's corporate officer and no other corporate officer, or no other entity's corporate officer, I should say. And then I'm coming back down. I'm sorry, I'll pause in case anybody has a question there.
Everybody good? Continue.
Great, thank you. And then I'm coming back to, again, this was a Commissioner Mesner's requested clarification to incorporate the discussions from this morning surrounding transferred low producing wells. We went back and forth about this one a little bit over the past 10 minutes or so. And we settled on this reference back to 218B5A in order to take into account the single well financial assurance for any transferred low producing well. So if it was required by 218B5A and the transfer was approved by the director pursuant to 218G. So hopefully this captures what you were looking for, Commissioner Mesner, and if not, I am happy to attempt to edit again.
Commissioner Mesner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate it, AAG Stafford. I guess, and I'm probably not being clear, but in our current version of the rules, and let me give you a citation here. So this is going to take me a little while, but it's in 702, right? And not in the 218, but it's in 702 where it addressed transferred low producing wells. The language in there states single well financial assurance for any low producing well that exceeds the threshold set forth in Rule 702D1B IIAA. Now, this was talking about option 1, right? And was subject to a transfer of operatorship approved by the director or commission pursuant to Rule 218G. I think my point is we've already got this language in there for 1 and 2, for option 1 and 2, realizing that the 702D1B sections are going to be different as far as how it's referenced. Why not just use those 702 rule references in the transfer of low producing wells in option 5 to be consistent amongst 1, 2, and 5? So that's really my question: is why are we making it different?
AAG Stafford.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Commissioner Messner, just to ask you maybe a finally a brief clarification question on my part. So is your suggestion that we refer back to Roman numerat 1 under this section here? And I'll share my screen.
If
So
you would do that, that would be helpful.
apologies. I thought I was
'Cause
already sharing.
I'm on a red line and it's hard for me to get the numbers and letters and ruminants right. So like go up from there and go to option 1, right? Where it talks about transfer. You see where it says here, transfer low producing wells?
Yes.
And it references set forth in rule 702 D1 BIIAA and was subject.
Mhm.
Now, this is kicking up to AA, which indicates low producing wells, right? And I guess it would just be section 1, so it would kick down to option 5. So whatever the option 5 wells are. So that would be the amount of financial assurance based on well status and designation, and under what circumstances the director will collect single well financial assurance for future low producing wells. I'm not saying that this doesn't capture it. I mean, I can be okay with this, but I just want to make sure. I was just trying to make it simple as far as how the language tracks through all the different options. But I mean, I don't need to get hung up on this as long as it's clear that that there are going to be allowances associated with option 5. And that it can't be interpreted that all low producing wells being transferred by option 5 require single well financial assurance. Does that make sense?
Yes. Sorry, Chair Robbins, if I may. Yes, I believe that makes sense. So instead of what we have here, you would prefer something similar to what we have in the option 2 or the option 1 and 2 language referencing the transfer low producing wells. So here you would suggest referencing back up to this particular provision, talking about wells under option 5.
I mean, unless you think the 218B5A captures it better, right? So I'm explaining to you my intent, right? My intent is to capture that there is an allowance, and it's not any transferred low producing well is required single well financial assurance, right? And so if 218B5A captures that better, and I can go back and look at 218B5A if you give me a second. So again, I'm not trying to be a pain here. I just want to make it clear, because initially there was some heartburn that that read literally that just said any transferred low producing well in option 5 would be required single well financial assurance. I don't think that was ever the intent, but I wanted to make it clear that there is going to be some single well financial assurance required. It's just going to be based on whatever allowance is associated with the approval of the option 5 plan.
AG Stafford.
Thank you, Commissioner Mesner. And if you, I'll actually, let me defer to Director Murphy just to ensure that she doesn't have a particular language preference here. I know that we worked on this over the break, so I think this is this does capture your concern, but I also don't want to make any changes on behalf of staff just yet.
Thanks,
Director
AG.
Murphy.
Thanks all. Sorry. I'm just going to talk over everybody for the rest of the afternoon at this rate. Thank you, Commissioner Mesner, for articulating that. I misunderstood and thought you were trying to pull the thresholds into it. And so that's why I ended up suggesting we point back to 218. But with your clarification, I think I understand now that you're really trying to point to language within 702D5 instead of 702D1 or 2. And that helps me understand and connect the dots. And I think going forward with what you suggested makes perfect sense.
Okay. Good by me.
Everybody else good?
And hopefully my long-winded answer gave Caitlin a few seconds to sort it all out.
I am, apologies. I'm working just 1 minute here. I will try to get this back up.
You're really smart. You do the typing before you do the screen sharing, unlike the director.
That works for me.
Hey, Commissioner Mesner, is the 17th time the charm this time?
All right.
Thank you for your patience on that.
No, thank you. Thank you both. Thank all of you. Anything further? Commissioner Messner.
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but I know that we're probably about to vote on this. But like Commissioner McGowan, I want to make sure that I take a moment here to thank all of the work that has been put in by COGCC staff, by all of my fellow commissioners, and probably most importantly, all the citizens and stakeholders that have engaged in this process over this at least year-long timeframe. I mean, I do think that the financial assurance rules that we've developed in this rulemaking, are truly a paradigm shift. I think they fundamentally change how financial assurance for oil and gas activities in the state of Colorado are addressed. I mean, I think everyone here knows that they were an outcome of over a year's worth of collaboration and input from a really diverse group of individuals and stakeholders. I believe they not only meet the mandate set forward by Senate Bill 19-181, but really have created a model for financial assurance that will lead the nation. I think they contemplate how financial assurance is addressed through the entire life cycle of oil and gas operations and operators. I think it creates a robust orphan well funding mechanism paid for by industry. I think it is protective of the taxpayers of the state and really sets the standard for thoughtful and responsible oil and gas development and operators in the state of Colorado. So, I mean, once again, I'm really appreciative of all the work put into this by COGCC staff, by my fellow commissioners and stakeholders and citizens from across the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. Commissioner Najapa.
Well, I had intended to make some similar comments, so I won't repeat because most of the sentiments that I've thought of have been expressed, but just again, I do want to reiterate the thanks to especially the staff and all the tireless work that they've put in these past couple of weeks, especially with crunching all of these bits and pieces of information and getting it into drafts far more quickly than I could ever imagine doing myself. And I just really appreciate that. And all the stakeholders as well. I do want to just acknowledge Ana Gutierrez, just because I think she really went above and beyond with the particular model that she put forward and all the research that she and her colleagues did. And I say that just especially as a woman, women don't often get credit for their ideas. And so I just want to acknowledge her publicly for that. So.
All right. I echo all of the thoughts of my fellow commissioners. With that, I would look for a motion to close the record.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to close the record. We have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I now would look for a motion. Let me type this up. A motion to adopt the February 25th, 2022 draft rules as amended by the commission today, March 1st, 2022, to authorize staff to make conforming and typographical edits as necessary, and to instruct staff to revise the statement of basis and purpose in accordance with commission direction.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I believe that concludes the business of the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission today. I want to thank the 78 attendees that are still with us. And I believe our business is done. We're looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We are adjourned. We will see everybody tomorrow morning for our regular business agenda at 9 a.m.